Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I got up that morning like usual. Just a normal weekday, nothing weird. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment, kind of cluttered, but it's home. The hallway between my bedroom and kitchen has these framed photos on the wall, me with my sister, my parents, some dumb vacation ones from college. They'd been up forever. I barely noticed them most days. But that morning, when I passed by them on the way to make coffee, I stopped. Something looked wrong. At first, I couldn't tell what. The frames were the same, nothing had fallen or broken. I stepped closer. Then I realized what I was looking at. All the pictures, every single one, had been replaced. And not just with random photos. They were all of me. Sleeping. My bed, my blanket, even the stupid ratty t-shirt I'd worn the night before. Some were close up, like right by my face. Others were from the foot of the bed. But they were all me, clearly asleep, and clearly taken at night. I don't use any kind of sleep app or baby monitor or anything like that. It felt like I'd been hit in the chest. My apartment door had been locked. My windows were shut. I live on the 3rd floor. No fire escape. I don't have guests. I don't have a roommate. I don't even have a cat. I backed away from the wall, kind of in a daze. My mouth felt dry. I went to check the front door, still locked, deadbolt too. I checked the windows in the living room and bedroom. Nothing broken, nothing tampered with. I don't remember making the coffee. I just remember standing in the kitchen with a mug in my hand and not drinking it. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I took the photos down. I checked each one for any sort of label or clue. Nothing. Just glossy prints. Someone had taken the time to size them perfectly to fit the frames. That was the part that really got me. Whoever did this wasn't in a rush. They had time to print and trim them. They wanted me to notice. Around noon, I called my sister. I didn't tell her everything, just said something weird happened and asked if she'd been over recently. She hadn't. She lives an hour away and doesn't have a key. I didn't feel like explaining more, mostly because I didn't know how. I started thinking maybe I'd done it somehow. Like maybe I sleepwalked and, I don't know, photoshopped myself and printed them in my sleep. That's how messed up my head felt. I was trying to make it make sense, and nothing did. That night, I didn't sleep. I locked the bedroom door, even though that felt dumb. I left the lights on and sat in the living room with the bat I keep by the couch. Every time the fridge hummed or the building creaked, I flinched. I must have nodded off at some point. When I woke up, it was 5:30 a.m., and I was still alone. I checked the wall again. The frames were empty. No photos at all now. Just the backing boards. The little clasps on a few were still open, like someone had taken the prints out and left in a hurry. I checked the locks again. Still engaged. Nothing broken. I called the cops. They showed up, walked through the apartment, asked questions. I told them someone had been inside, replaced my photos with ones of me sleeping, then came back to remove them. One of the officers asked if I had an ex or someone who might be messing with me. I don't. I don't really date. I'm mostly cheap to myself. The only other people who have ever been in this place are my sister and the landlord, and even the landlord only once. They didn't find any signs of forced entry. They made a report and said I should call if anything else happened. One of them suggested I install a camera. I ordered one that night and picked it up the next day. I also changed the locks. Both of them. I paid for the hardware and did it myself. I started sleeping with the new camera pointed straight at my bed. A week went by. Nothing. No weird photos. No signs of anyone in the apartment. I started to think maybe it was over. Maybe it had been a one-time thing, some messed up prank that ended when I called the police. Then, about 10 days after the first incident, I came home from work and found an envelope on my doormat. No stamp, no address. Just my name, handwritten. I opened it right there in the hallway. Inside was one photo. It was me again. Asleep. Different shirt, different night. The angle was from the doorway this time, just inside the room, like the person had been standing there watching me. It had to be recent. I recognized the comforter I'd put on the bed just 3 nights earlier. I went cold. I stood there staring at it, knowing I had changed the locks, knowing the windows were locked too. I checked the camera footage. It had been unplugged. Not powered off. Not the battery run down. Someone had physically unplugged it from the wall, and then plugged it back in before I got home. They had been in the apartment again. I packed a bag and left that night. Stayed with my sister for a week while I tried to figure out what to do. She was freaked out too, especially when I finally told her everything. I didn't want to burden her with it, but I didn't feel safe alone. When I came back, it was just to move out. I never found out who did it. The landlord said no one else had access to my unit and the building's outer door lock hadn't been changed. There were no other reports from tenants. Nothing ever showed up on the footage after the night the camera was unplugged. I still have that last photo. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. Maybe to remind myself to always check the locks and never assume I'm alone just because I locked the door. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. It was a Saturday afternoon. I had driven to this little strip mall near my apartment, nothing special, just a grocery run. When I came back out, there was a single rose tucked under my windshield wiper. I figured maybe someone had been selling them in the lot and just left one behind. It was kind of sweet, I guess, in a weird way. I tossed it on the passenger seat and forgot about it. The second time was a few days later. I was in a completely different area downtown, in a covered parking garage. I'd gone to meet a friend for dinner. We parked on different levels. When I came back to my car, there was another rose. Same color. Same size. Tucked exactly the same way, under the driver's side wiper. That time, I paused. It was just strange. The garage was paid parking, not open to the public like the strip mall. No vendors, no flower shops. And it wasn't busy that night. I asked my friend about it, thinking maybe she'd done it as a joke. She hadn't. I started to feel a little weird then, but I still tried to brush it off. Coincidences happen. Then it started happening every time I parked somewhere alone. Not when I was with other people, not when I got dropped off, not when I parked in a friend's driveway. Only when I parked alone, out in public. Grocery stores. Malls. A park. Even a Target 20 minutes from where I lived. Always the same thing. A rose on the windshield. Always fresh. Always placed carefully under the wiper. I asked around coworkers, friends, even posted on a local Facebook group, but nobody else had seen anything like it. A few people joked that I had a secret admirer. I laughed, but it didn't feel funny anymore. I started checking for people lingering in the lots. No one ever stood out. Sometimes the car next to me would be empty. Sometimes it'd be running, but the person inside would be looking at their phone or eating or just not paying attention to me at all. The weirdest part was, it didn't matter where I went. I went to visit my parents 2 towns over, and after dinner, we went to the movies. I parked on the street, 2 blocks from the theater. When I came back to the car, there it was. At that point, I knew someone was following me. There was no other explanation. I started taking photos of the roses. I kept some of them in a box. I wasn't sure why. Maybe to prove to myself it was real. One night, I stayed late at work. I parked in the small employee lot behind the building. It's not gated, but there's no real reason for anyone else to be back there, just a single row of spaces behind a bunch of office buildings. When I left, it was almost 9 o'clock. It had rained a little. The lot was dimly lit and quiet. And the rose was there again. I looked around. Nothing. Not a single person. The building next to ours had one light on, but it looked empty. I got in the car and locked the doors immediately. This time I didn't drive straight home. I drove around for almost an hour, taking turns at random. I parked in a big grocery lot and sat there with the engine running. No one came near me. I watched every car. I went home when the lot cleared out. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I went to the police. I told them everything. I showed them the pictures. They were polite, but they didn't have much to offer. There weren't any direct threats, and I hadn't seen anyone. They told me to keep an eye out and to try changing my routine. So I did. I parked in different spots. I varied my schedule. I used rideshare apps when I could. I borrowed my sister's car once just to test it, and when I parked it behind a gas station to grab coffee, the rose was on her windshield when I came back. It wasn't about the car. It was me. After that, I bought a dash cam and one of those little cameras that sticks in the rear window. They didn't help. The footage always cut off or glitched around the time I was gone. Sometimes it would skip 10 minutes. Once it just stopped recording for the exact time I was inside the store and picked back up when I was driving away. I checked the power. I swapped the SD cards. I even replaced the camera. Same thing. The worst night, the one that really got to me, was when I went to a 24-hour laundromat. It was late, almost midnight, and I only went because I'd forgotten I was out of clean work clothes. There were only 2 other people there, both sitting in the back, headphones in. I brought my stuff in and came out 10 minutes later to grab something I'd forgotten in the car. That time, the rose wasn't on the windshield. It was on the driver's seat. The door had been locked. I was sure of it. Nothing else was touched, not the glove box, not the back seat. Just a single rose, laid perfectly in the middle of the seat. I drove straight to my sister's that night and stayed there for a week. I left the car at her place and took public transit to work. Eventually I went back. I had to. Life doesn't stop. I didn't park in the same spot twice. I stayed alert. I didn't see any roses for a while, and I let myself believe maybe it was over. Then last month, I took a weekend trip to a different state. Just 3 days, stayed at a little Airbnb near a lake, 4 hours from home. The whole time I was there, I didn't see anything strange. But when I got home, I opened my trunk to unload my bag, and there it was. A rose. perfectly fresh, just sitting there on top of the folded towels I'd packed. I hadn't opened the trunk since I left the cabin. Whoever it was, they hadn't stopped. They'd just gotten better. That was the last time I found one. I moved 2 weeks later. Changed my job. Changed my number. Sold the car. I still don't know how long they followed me. I don't know how they kept finding me. I never saw their face. Never got a note. Just roses over and over until it felt like I was losing my mind. I don't park in lots anymore. I don't go anywhere alone unless I absolutely have to. No more roses. Not yet. I was driving back from a friend's cabin late on a Sunday afternoon. It was up in the mountains, pretty remote, and I'd stayed an extra night alone after everyone else left that morning. I liked the quiet. No one around, no notifications blowing up my phone, just coffee, some old records, and no one bothering me. The drive back was long. I didn't rush it. I took my time winding through the back roads before hitting the highway. Around dusk, maybe 7:30, I stopped at this little gas station just off a rural exit. It was one of those old ones with 2 pumps and a tiny building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I pulled in mostly for snacks and to stretch my legs. There were no other cars there when I parked. Inside, the place was empty except for the cashier, who barely looked up. I grabbed a Gatorade, a bag of pretzels, and a coffee from the sad-looking hot drink machine in the corner. As I was paying, the little bell above the door jingled behind me. I glanced over and saw a guy walking mid-40s, average build, ball cap, plain clothes. The kind of guy you forget seeing 5 minutes later. I didn't pay him much attention. I was digging for a couple singles in my wallet. Then the guy walked up next to me at the counter. I figured he was waiting his turn, but he leaned in close, real close, and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I looked at him. I wasn't sure I heard right. I thought maybe he was mistaking me for someone else. "Sorry?" I said. He didn't answer. He just smiled, not friendly, not angry either. Just off. Then he turned around and walked right back out the door. Didn't buy anything. I looked at the cashier, but he didn't seem fazed. Didn't even glance up. I stood there for a second, kind of frozen. It took me a minute to pay and leave. I figured, weird guy, mistaken identity, no big deal. It happens. But when I stepped back outside, I noticed a car parked across the lot that hadn't been there before. Black sedan, tinted windows. Nothing unusual about the car itself, but the timing stuck with me. I got in my car, locked the doors, and started driving. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but I kept checking my mirror. After about 10 minutes back on the highway, I saw headlights pull onto the road behind me. Same shape as the sedan. I tried not to overthink it. But every time I switched lanes or took an exit, the car did too. I got back onto the main interstate and pulled into a rest stop, one of the bigger ones with vending machines and a few trucks parked off to the side. I sat in my car with the engine running for a while. The black sedan pulled in maybe 30 seconds later and parked at the far end of the lot. Lights off. I stayed where I was. Didn't get out. After maybe 10 minutes, the car backed out and left. I gave it a while longer, just to be sure, then got back on the road. I didn't see the car again for the next hour. I figured that was the end of it. I got home around 10 o'clock. My apartment's in a smaller building, just 6 units. Quiet neighborhood, Nothing ever really happens around here. I parked on the street like always. As I was walking up the steps to the building, I got this weird feeling. Like that hyper-aware, goosebump kind of feeling. I looked around, nothing. Empty street, no cars coming, no one walking by. But when I unlocked the front door and stepped into the lobby, I swear I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Just one step. I turned around fast. Nobody. I locked the door and went upstairs, still telling myself it was just me being paranoid. My apartment faces the back alley. There's a narrow fire escape and an old wooden fence that separates the building from the lot behind it. Around 1 a.m., I was watching TV when I noticed movement through the blinds. I turned the volume down and listened. There were footsteps. Slow. On the gravel. I stood up and moved to the window quietly. I tilted one of the blinds just enough to peek through. A man was standing by the fence. Not doing anything. Just standing there. I couldn't make out his face clearly in the dark, but he was wearing a baseball cap. I stood there watching him. He didn't move. Didn't even look around. After maybe 30 seconds, he walked out a few, not away from the building, but along the back wall, like he was heading toward the side of the building. I ran to the front window and looked down at the street. Nothing. Then I went to the kitchen window. It faces the side alley. I didn't see anyone there either. I didn't sleep. I left all the lights on and kept peeking out the windows every 15 minutes. Nothing else happened that night. Next morning, I walked around the back alley before heading to work. No sign of anything. No footprints, no trash moved, nothing. A few days went by. Nothing unusual. I started to feel silly about the whole thing. Then one evening, I got a letter. No return address. Just my name written in blocky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. All it said was, "I waited. You never came back." That's when I started taking things seriously. I installed a camera facing the alley. I changed the locks. I bought blackout curtains and a door jammer. And I reported it to the police. I gave them the note, told them about the guy at the gas station, the car, everything. They took the report, but they didn't seem too interested. No real threat, they said. The next week, nothing. I checked the footage every night. No one out back. No new letters. Then, early Saturday morning, maybe 4 a.m., I was woken up by this quiet tapping. Not loud. Just a soft, steady tap. I thought maybe it was coming from the heat pipes or something. I lay there listening for a while before getting up. The tapping stopped. I walked around the apartment, checking the windows. All locked. Nothing outside. Then I checked the front door. It was locked. But something caught my eye on the floor. A small slip of paper slid under the door. It was blank. Just a torn corner from a notebook page. I didn't hear anyone in the hallway. I looked through the peephole, nothing. I watched the hallway camera footage later that morning. At 3:58 a.m., a man walked down the hall. No hesitation. Stopped at my door. Stood there for a solid minute. Slid the paper under. Then turned and walked back the way he came. He never looked at the camera. I took that footage to the police. They said they'd file it. That was it. I didn't want to stay there anymore. I started sleeping at a buddy's place across town. After 2 weeks of that, I decided to move completely. I broke my lease, ate the penalty, and found a new place in a gated complex. I never saw that man again. and I still don't know who he was. I usually ran early in the morning, before work. Not because I was some big fitness person or anything, but I liked the quiet. No traffic, no people. Just birds and air and space to think. There's a trail that loops around a wooded area behind my apartment complex. It's not big, maybe 1.5 miles, but it's clean and tucked away. I'd run it almost every day for a year. That morning was like any other. I left just after 6. It was still kind of dark, but the sky was turning blue. I had my hoodie on, headphones in, same route I always took. I didn't notice anything weird at first. About halfway through the loop, the trail dips down a bit and cuts through this thicker patch of trees. That part always gave me the creeps a little, just because it's quiet and there's no houses close by. As I rounded the curve, I noticed something stuck to a tree up ahead. Looked like paper at first. I thought maybe a flyer or a lost dog sign or something. When I got closer, I realized it was a photo. It was printed on cheap paper, like from a home printer. Just taped up at eye level. The picture was of me. It took me a second to process. It wasn't from the run, it was earlier that morning. I was in the parking lot of my building, stretching next to my car. Same hoodie, same leggings, same shoes. I took out my headphones and looked around. The trail was empty. No people, no cars on the road behind the trees. Just the wind and some birds. I tried to tell myself it was a prank. Maybe someone messing around. Maybe I was overthinking it. I pulled the photo down and kept walking. About 20 feet later, there was another one. Same kind of photo, printed on regular paper, taped to the trunk. This time it was me jogging out of the complex entrance, just past the sidewalk. I pulled that one down too. My heart was starting to thump now, not from the run. I looked around again. Still no one. I walked slowly now, scanning the trees. There was a third one, just a few steps ahead. It showed me standing at the edge of the trail where I always pause to start my fitness app. Whoever took these had followed me. That morning, I turned around and started walking back the way I came, but then I stopped. There were more photos taped in that direction too. I hadn't noticed them when I first passed. Whoever did this must have come right after me. Maybe even while I was still running. My chest felt tight. I didn't know what to do. The trail had 2 exits, one led back toward my apartment, the other looped around to a street that connected to the main road. I didn't want to go back the way I came, so I kept moving forward. I took off the hoodie and wrapped it around my waist. I don't know why. I guess it felt like something he'd be looking for. I started jogging again, faster now. Every few trees, there was another photo. Me waiting at the crosswalk. Me jogging past the old gas station at the corner. There were no pictures from the trail itself. Just the walk from my apartment to the entrance. Which meant whoever it was had gotten ahead of me somehow. Or they knew the trail well enough to cut through. I passed one photo that was different, not me running. It was a picture of my back as I stretched at the trail entrance. Whoever took it had been standing behind me. I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing and my shoes hitting the dirt. The trail curved again and opened up near the edge of a neighborhood. I ran up the small hill and finally saw the break in the trees where the path met the sidewalk. I didn't look back. I just ran. I followed the road until I hit the 7-Eleven a few blocks down. I went inside and called a rideshare to take me home. The cashier asked if I was okay. I lied and said I felt faint. When I got home, I called the police. An officer came out and walked the trail with me. The photos were gone. Not just the ones I hadn't taken down, all of them. I showed him the two I still had, the first and second ones. He said they couldn't do much unless someone was actually caught in the act. They said I should avoid the trail for a while. So I stopped running. I changed my routine, started going to a gym after work instead. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then, one Saturday, I got a manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside were about 10 photos. All printed the same way. All of me. From different days, different outfits. Coming out of my apartment. Walking to my car. At the grocery store. None of them recent. But all of them taken without me noticing. I moved out of that apartment 3 months later. New place. Different side of town. No trails nearby. I still run, but only in daylight. Always at the gym. And I never, ever wore the same outfit twice in a week. I first noticed it at the gym. There's this clipboard at the front desk where you sign in if the scanner's acting up. I hadn't needed it in a while, but that day the system was down, so I wrote my name and glanced at the lines above mine out of habit. About 5 rows up, I saw my own name. Same handwriting, more or less. Not perfect, but close. Enough to make you do a double take. The date was from 3 days earlier. I hadn't been at the gym that day. I was out of town for work. I even had the flight confirmation in my email to prove it. I asked the kid at the front desk if someone else could have signed for me. He kind of shrugged and said people sometimes write in for friends, but they're not supposed to. It bugged me more than it should have, I guess. Maybe because I knew I hadn't asked anyone to do that. And I didn't really have gym buddies like that anyway. I tried to brush it off. Figured maybe someone with the same name or a mix-up. Then it happened again. About a week later, I went to donate blood at the mobile center that parks in front of the Walgreens once a month. I go pretty regularly. I'm O negative, and they always call me when they're low. When I gave my ID, the woman checking me in frowned and said I was already listed for that month. I said no, I hadn't been in yet. She showed me the sign-in sheet. There was my name, first and last, written 2 days earlier. Even my phone number was correct. I asked if they had a picture or a record of who signed in. She said no, it's all paper. They didn't check ID if you were in the system already. That time, I didn't brush it off. I started checking. I pulled up emails, apps, anything that might show where I'd been and when. There was no way I'd been there that day. I was at work. I remember the day clearly. It was the morning the fire alarm went off and we had to evacuate for half an hour. It wasn't just a weird coincidence. Someone was using my name. And they were writing it the way I do, same loops in the Y, same way I cross my T's with a little curve. I don't know why that part freaked me out so much. It wasn't just my name. It was me. The way I sign things, little details I don't even think about. I told a friend about it. He laughed and said maybe I had a stalker. I laughed too, but it felt fake coming out of my mouth. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't identity theft exactly. Nothing was missing, no charges, no credit issues. Just copies of me scattered around. About a month after that, I got a call from a community center I'd never heard of. They said I left a jacket there. I told them it wasn't mine, and they read off the name written on the tag inside. It was mine. They also had a clipboard for a free class registration with my name on it. My signature at the bottom. This was across town, nowhere near where I lived or worked. I asked if I could come see the jacket. They said sure. It wasn't mine, but it could have been. Same size, same basic style, black windbreaker, nothing special. I didn't recognize it, but it wasn't like I had some distinct fashion. The woman at the desk said I seemed quiet the day I registered. Very polite, she said. Didn't say much. I asked if they had security cameras. She said they did, but they only kept footage for a few days. This had been over a week ago. I took the jacket anyway. At home, I went through the pockets. There was a receipt from a gas station I never use. Cash transaction. Timestamp was 7:32 a.m., same day the class sign-up happened. I checked my calendar. I was home, sleeping in. I remembered waking up late and getting breakfast delivered. So either someone was screwing with me in a really elaborate way, or this was something else. I didn't know what that something else was, but it wasn't harmless. That's when I started calling the places myself. Not just ones I went to random places. The community library, a small church nearby, a voter registration table outside a farmer's market. Each one had a clipboard. Each one had some form of sign-in, attendance, or registration. And about 1 out of every 4 had my name on it. Some were old. Some were new. The handwriting was always close, not perfect, but if I wasn't paying attention, I might have thought I signed it myself. I started collecting pictures. I asked to take photos of the sheets. Some people looked at me funny, but I told them I was trying to track down someone using my identity. Most didn't ask questions. Eventually I had a folder on my phone with 13 different sign-ins, all with my name. All written in slight variations of my handwriting. Spread across 3 months, 5 neighborhoods, and at least 2 counties. I stopped sleeping well. I started locking my bedroom door, even though I lived alone. One night I stayed up late, scrolling through every sheet I'd photographed, comparing them. It was around 2 in the morning when I noticed something. All the dates lined up with days I was home. Every single one. Not days I was out. Not days I was traveling. Only days I'd been in my apartment. Whoever it was didn't follow me around town. They avoided me. That's when I realized they weren't trying to be me. They were trying to live around me. Just outside my path. Close, but not too close. I started looking out my windows more. I kept the blinds open at night. I watched the street, the parking lot, the sidewalk across from my building. Sometimes I thought I saw people standing too long. A car idling with no one getting out. Someone walking by twice in the same hour. I started recognizing a shape, kind of tall, always in a hood or cap. Sometimes holding a phone up. Once, leaning against a street lamp and looking down at their shoes for 10 minutes. But I could never catch them head on. Never saw a full face. It was like watching the same scene replay from a distance. Then one morning, a letter slid under my door. No stamp, no writing on the outside. Inside was a single piece of paper printed from a computer this time. It said, "You've been a great role model." That was it. I moved 2 weeks later. Left the city. Found a job somewhere else. I still check sign-in sheets, though. Everywhere I go. I got home from work a little after 6. Same as always, shoes off, microwave humming, dog whining to go out. Nothing weird. There was a cardboard box on the porch, no return address, but I get enough online orders that I didn't really think twice. It had my name and the right apartment number, so I brought it inside and opened it on the counter. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. Inside was a white dress folded neatly in tissue paper. At first, I thought it was just some random outfit. Then I saw the lace at the sleeves, the long train, the way it shimmered slightly. It was a wedding dress. My size. I didn't even have to hold it up to know that. Whoever sent it knew exactly how tall I was, how wide my hips were, the length of my arms. I don't even wear dresses, let alone something like that. I'm not engaged. I've never even tried one on. There was a note tucked under the plastic hanger. It was handwritten, kind of messy, like the pen was running out of ink. You left this behind. That was it. I stood there just staring at it. I hadn't ordered anything remotely close to that. No friends would send me something like this. And the phrasing, not "this is for you" or "thought you'd like this." Just, "you left this behind." I tossed it back in the box and shoved it into the hall closet, trying to convince myself it was just a screwed up delivery. Maybe some wedding place had the wrong address. Still, I checked my Amazon and email, nothing. No order history, no receipt. Nothing in the mailbox either. That night, I kept the TV on longer than usual. The apartment felt too quiet. Every time I looked at the closet, I thought I heard the tissue paper crinkle. I knew it was probably the heater or the dog shifting around, but still. The next morning, I left the box in the dumpster behind the building. Just didn't want it in my place. But it came back. 2 days later, I came home and the box was back on my porch. Same condition, same handwriting, same note, only this time, there was no tape. It was just folded closed. And the tissue paper inside looked messy, like someone had gone through it. I felt sick. I didn't even touch it. I locked the door, checked the windows, and called the non-emergency police line. They said they'd make a note, maybe send a car to swing by. That was it. I knew it wasn't enough, but I didn't know what else to do. That night, I barely slept. I pushed a chair under the doorknob even though I have a deadbolt. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard something on the porch. Not footsteps exactly, more like a creak of the floorboards and then nothing. I didn't look. I just lay there with my hand on the dog's collar, waiting for the sun to come up. Next day, I called the leasing office and asked if they had cameras. They said the porch area didn't have coverage, only the parking lot and entrances. I asked if anyone had seen anything weird, like someone hanging around the building, and the woman just said, "Not that I know of," like she'd already stopped listening. That night, I stayed with a friend across town. I didn't tell her everything, just said I was having a weird week. We drank wine, watched TV, and I crashed on her couch. When I got back the next morning, my doormat was flipped upside down. It's one of those basic ones that just says "welcome," so it was obvious it had been turned. I don't know why, but that part really freaked me out. Like it was a message. Something small, but on purpose. I went inside and everything looked untouched until I got to the bedroom. The closet door was open. I never leave it open. I'm kind of obsessive about that. Always shut it before bed. But there it was, halfway open, like someone had been in a hurry. The clothes were fine, nothing stolen or weird, but I noticed the window was unlocked. I never opened that window. It faces the alley, and it's stiff as hell. You have to really yank it to get it to budge. I locked it immediately and checked the rest of the apartment. Nothing else looked off. Still, I filed a police report that time. Told them someone had been inside while I was gone. They said they'd send someone by again. A cop showed up later and looked around but didn't find any signs of forced entry. He kind of shrugged, like maybe I'd left the door unlocked or something. I hadn't. That night, I brought the dog into my room and slept with the lights on. Nothing happened, but I barely slept. My skin felt too tight, like I was waiting for something the whole time. The next day I bought one of those cheap indoor cameras, just something to point at the door while I was out. I set it up, left for work, came home, and checked the footage. Nothing. Just the dog walking around, laying down, walking again. Next day, same thing. Then, on the third day, I came home and the dog wasn't at the door to greet me. I called her name, nothing. Started getting nervous until I found her in the bedroom, sitting inside the open closet, just staring at the wall. She wouldn't come up for a while. Eventually I had to coax her with a treat. She seemed jumpy the rest of the night. I checked the camera again. There was a 10-minute stretch around 2:15 p.m. where the feed went black. It just cut out and picked back up at 2:26. I rewound a few times to make sure it wasn't a glitch. It wasn't. It was like someone had turned it off, then turned it back on. I started staying at my friend's place more after that. A week went by with nothing. Then she and I both had to be at work late on a Friday, so I figured I'd just stop by the apartment real quick, grab a few things, maybe sleep there one last night. I got there around 7. It was already dark, and the porch light was off, even though it's automatic. That was weird, but I didn't want to deal with it, so I just used my phone flashlight. There was no package this time, but the front door was unlocked. I swear on everything, I triple-check my locks. I'm the person who gets out of the car to check again before bed. I never leave it open. I stood there for a long time before touching the knob. My whole body felt wrong, like even my bones didn't want to go inside. But I needed my laptop and some papers for work, so I went in. Everything looked normal. I walked room by room holding my breath. Then I got to the bedroom. The wedding dress was laid out perfectly on the bed. No box, no note, just the dress. Smoothed out, sleeves folded over the sides like it was waiting for someone. And next to it, on the nightstand, was a disposable camera. It was facing me. I grabbed the dog, my laptop, and bolted out. Left everything else behind. Later, the cops found no one inside. No prints besides mine. The camera had 10 photos left. I didn't ask what was on the rest. I just told them to take it. I moved in with my friend for a while and eventually got out of the lease. I don't know how they got in. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know that whoever it was had a key and knew my size and got close enough to my dog to make her sit in silence like that. I haven't worn white since. I was freelancing at the time, doing marketing work, mostly writing social posts and email campaigns for small companies. I couldn't really afford a private office, so I got a membership at this co-working space downtown. It was one of those 24/7 ones where you swipe in with a key card. Nothing fancy, just rows of desks, coffee machine, a kitchen that always smelled like microwave popcorn, and a bunch of freelancers with headphones on pretending not to be broke. Most nights I worked late. I did my best thinking when no one was around, so I'd usually show up around 7 p.m. and stay until maybe midnight or later. The place cleared out by 8 most nights, except for a few people. One of them was this guy. I never caught his name. That's kind of the whole thing, I guess. I noticed him maybe 2 weeks in. He always came in around 9. Tall, maybe late 40s, glasses, button-down shirt. Looked like someone's quiet uncle. He'd sit 2 tables across from me, near the far window. Never brought a laptop. Just sat there. At first I figured he was taking a break or waiting for someone. But then he kept showing up. Same time, same seat. Never spoke. never even looked around. He'd just sit with his hands folded or resting on his knees. No phone, no book, just still. I thought maybe he was meditating or something, but who does that in a shared workspace? And for hours? I remember one night I stayed till 1 a.m., and he was still there when I left. Just sitting. It bugged me, but not in a huge way at first. I just made a mental note. Weird guy, probably harmless. People do weird stuff. The city's full of weirdos, right? But one night, maybe a Thursday, I was microwaving leftover pad thai in the kitchen, and I looked through the glass door into the main space. He was already there. Sitting, as usual. But this time, his head was turned slightly toward me. I stood there, holding my plastic container, watching him through the door. His eyes didn't move. His face didn't change. He was just watching. I felt something crawl up my neck, like a static charge. When I came back out, he turned his head back forward. I sat down at my desk and tried to get into work, but I kept glancing over. He didn't budge. For hours. The next couple nights, I avoided eye contact. I didn't want to feed into anything, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. But once you notice someone doing something that doesn't quite fit, it's like your brain can't stop tracking it. It's like a sensor that keeps pinging. Friday night, I stayed later than usual. I was trying to finish a campaign deck, and I didn't want to work through the weekend. Around 10:30, I realized I was the only one left. No hum of other laptops, no chairs creaking, just the buzz of the ceiling lights and the quiet clack of my keys. I glanced up and froze. He wasn't at his usual table. He was closer. One table away. Same posture. Same direction. Closer. I didn't hear him move. The place was so quiet, I would have heard footsteps. But there he was, just one table between us. I stared at my screen for a few seconds, not typing. I could feel heat rising in my face. I told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe someone had sat there earlier and he'd just taken the open spot. But I hadn't seen anyone else in hours. I packed up quicker than usual and left. I didn't run or anything, just walked briskly, told myself I needed to catch the train. As I swiped my key card at the exit door, I looked back. He hadn't moved. Saturday I didn't go in. I needed a break anyway. Sunday, same thing. I told myself I'd only go during the day from now on. Enough of the late night shifts. Monday, I came in around noon. There were plenty of people, some meetings going on in the classrooms, someone doing a Zoom call without headphones, as usual. I felt better. Until I saw him. Same guy. Same button down. Sitting at the far end, just past the printers. No laptop, no phone. Just sitting. He hadn't been there when I walked in. I was sure of it. It was like he showed up after I sat down, like he was waiting. Or watching. I stayed for less than an hour, then packed up and went to a cafe instead. That night, I emailed the building manager. I kept it vague. Said there was a man who made me uncomfortable, didn't accuse him of anything, just asked if maybe they could check the security cams or something. I got a polite reply the next morning. We'll look into it. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. I didn't go back that week. The next Monday, I gave it another shot. It was late again. I needed the quiet. Around 8 p.m., the place was almost empty. I walked the whole floor before I sat down. No sign of him. I set up at a table closer to the door. Just in case. Worked for an hour or so, then went to the kitchen for water. When I came back out, he was there. Not across from me. Not by the window. He was sitting in my seat. Same posture. Same direction. Staring at my screen. I froze in the doorway. It didn't make sense. I hadn't even been gone 2 minutes. I hadn't heard the door. My laptop was still open, my bag still next to the chair. I backed into the hallway and left. Didn't even grab my stuff. I walked straight out and called my friend Dana, who lived 10 minutes away. Slept on her couch that night. Next morning, I came back with her to get my things. Broad daylight, full office, people everywhere. My laptop was still there, untouched. Nothing stolen. No sign of the guy. I asked the front desk if they'd seen him. The girl there looked confused. Do you mean Robert? He comes in sometimes, usually at night. Robert, I said. He works here? She hesitated. Not really. He doesn't have a membership. He used to, years ago. But his access expired. Then how's he getting in? She didn't answer at first. Just kind of blinked. We flagged it. Management's working on it. That night, I moved all my files to the cloud and canceled my membership. 2 weeks later, I saw him again. Not in the building. Not even downtown. I was in a coffee shop uptown, laptop open, trying to finish a client project. The place was packed. I was facing the window. And across the street, half behind a bus stop, was a man standing completely still. He wasn't watching me directly, but he was facing my window, like he was waiting. I closed my laptop and left out the side door. Took the long way home. Checked behind me every block. I never saw him again after that, but I still keep my screen facing the wall wherever I work, just in case. I didn't think much of it at first. The door was open when I woke up, but it's not like I was unfamiliar with strange things happening around my apartment. I lived in a pretty old building, one of those converted lofts where the walls are thin, the pipes always groan, and you can hear people on the stairs like they're in your room. So when I found my front door wide open at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, I assumed I'd either forgotten to lock it the night before or it had gotten stuck in the wind. It was a flimsy old door, after all. The kind you have to yank it just right to get it to shut all the way. But as I walked into the living room and saw the muddy boot prints on the floor, that's when I started to feel uneasy. The prints were clear, big and heavy, the kind you'd expect to see after someone's been trudging around in the rain. They were all over the living room and led straight to my bedroom. I froze. My heart started racing. I didn't remember hearing anything the night before. No knocks, no strange sounds. The place was quiet, like usual. I'm not a heavy sleeper, so the idea that I could have missed someone coming into my apartment was unsettling. I stepped cautiously toward the prints. They looked fresh, like someone had just walked through the mud and then straight into my apartment. I looked back at the open door, but nothing was there. I walked down the hallway, my eyes glued to the trail leading toward my bedroom. It felt like I couldn't take a full breath. It was too quiet. Too still. I reached the bedroom door. It was closed. The prints didn't stop at the door, though. They went all the way to it. As if whoever had been there had walked right up to the bedroom, but stopped. No footprints came out. I swallowed hard, the pit in my stomach growing bigger. I stood there for what felt like ages, just staring at the door. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Could it have been someone I knew? Maybe a friend who had come over without telling me, and I'd just been too out of it to notice. But if it was a friend, why didn't they knock or call? Why didn't they leave any sign of their departure? I tried to push the thought out of my head, but something in my gut told me it wasn't just an accidental slip-up. Something was off. I grabbed the handle of the door and turned it slowly, half expecting to find a person sitting on my bed or lurking in the corner. But no one was there. I glanced around the room. It was exactly as I'd left it the night before. Nothing seemed disturbed. The bed was still made. My clothes were scattered on the chair. I breathed a little easier, but that feeling of being watched, of something being wrong, didn't go away. It lingered, heavy in the air. I closed the bedroom door and stepped back into the hallway. I walked around the apartment, looking for any signs of anything unusual, but nothing. The kitchen was untouched. The bathroom, nothing. I checked the windows, making sure they were all locked. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I needed to find something. Anything. Something that would explain why my door had been open, why there were muddy footprints leading to my bedroom. I went back to the living room and bent down to examine the prints more closely. They weren't deep, but the mud was thick and clung to the soles of the boots. The pattern was strange, though. It didn't match any kind of boot I'd seen around here before. It was a mix of a work boot and something else, not something you'd normally wear in the city. Maybe someone who worked construction or did outdoor work, but I didn't know anyone like that. The silence in the apartment was suffocating. I kept thinking I'd hear something. A knock on the door. The sound of a footstep. Anything. But nothing. My phone sat silent on the counter. No calls, no texts, nothing. I went back to the door again, hesitated, and finally stepped outside. I felt the chill of the hallway hit me as I crossed the threshold into the building. I made my way down the stairs slowly, every creak of the old wood making me jump. I had no idea what I was doing out here. I didn't know if I expected to find someone, or if I was hoping to see something that would explain the whole mess, but when I reached the front door, I stopped. I leaned against the wall and looked outside. The street was empty, quiet. There were no signs of anyone, no movement, no cars driving by. It felt completely normal, except for the nagging feeling at the back of my mind that something was horribly wrong. I went back up to my apartment, locked the door behind me, and checked every window again. But nothing. Still no sign of anyone. The only thing that didn't make sense was the muddy footprints, the door being open, and the fact that whoever had been in here hadn't left. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The rest of the day passed slowly. I stayed in my apartment, didn't go anywhere. My mind kept drifting back to the prints, the way they come in but not left. The idea that someone had been in my apartment and just disappeared. I couldn't make sense of it. Maybe I was overthinking it, but the silence felt too thick, too suffocating. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept imagining someone standing outside my door, listening, waiting. The apartment felt too small, too open. Every little noise seemed amplified. The hum of the fridge. The creak of the old wooden floorboards. My own breath. It all felt wrong. The next morning, I went out to check the building's security footage. I figured I'd be able to see who had opened my door or who had been walking around in my apartment, but the cameras on my floor weren't working. The guy at the front desk said they'd been having problems with them for a while. Typical. I went back upstairs and took another look around the apartment. No more muddy footprints. The door was still locked. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling. I kept glancing over my shoulder, wondering if someone was hiding in the hallway, waiting. After a week, I finally decided to leave. I packed up my stuff and moved into a new place across town. I didn't feel comfortable there anymore. The door was always locked, the windows always closed, but I couldn't stop thinking about those muddy footprints leading to my bedroom and the eerie silence that followed. To this day, I don't know who had been in my apartment or why they came. I still lock my door, check my windows, and every time I leave, I feel like I'm being watched. I'm not sure what they were looking for or what they wanted, but I know one thing for sure: I'll never forget that feeling of someone being in my place, and then, nothing. I moved into this apartment a little over 6 months ago. It wasn't anything special, but it had its charm: old, creaky floors, a big window that let in a lot of light, and a small but decent kitchen. The rent was cheap, and the location wasn't bad either, so I figured it was a good deal. But over time, things started to feel off. Not immediately, but gradually. Little things, you know? At first, I thought I was just being paranoid or overly sensitive. It was an old building, after all. The walls were thin, the plumbing was noisy, and the landlord barely ever did maintenance. But there were these moments that stuck with me. Like, sometimes I'd be sitting in the living room, and I'd hear a faint scuffling noise coming from the walls or ceiling, like someone was walking around in the apartment above me. Only, no one ever lived there. The place had been vacant for months. I chalked it up to the building settling or pipes making strange noises. It wasn't like it happened all the time, but it was enough to make me feel uneasy when I was alone in the apartment. Anyway, about 2 months ago, I was cleaning up one of the air vents in the living room. It was dusty, and I'd noticed it had been giving off this faint, musty smell that I couldn't get rid of. When I took the vent cover off, something fell out. At first, I thought it was just more dust or maybe a piece of insulation that had come loose, but no. It was a small, leather-bound journal. It seemed out of place, and I didn't think much of it at first. But I picked it up and flipped it open, mostly out of curiosity. The pages inside were old, but still in decent shape, and the handwriting was neat, though cramped and a little rushed. The first few entries were just normal things, seemingly harmless, like someone keeping track of the weather or noting down their plans for the week. But then, the tone shifted. The first entry that made me feel uncomfortable was dated a couple of weeks before I moved in. It was all about me. My apartment. How I hadn't noticed yet, but I was already being watched. I blinked, not sure I was reading that correctly. But no, it was there in black ink. She moves around the apartment like clockwork. It's almost like she has a routine. It went on to describe my habits, the way I left for work at the same time each morning, the way I walked out of my building and turned left toward the bus stop, the route I took home in the evening. It was as if someone had been watching me. I felt this cold shiver run down my spine as I read those words, and I immediately closed the book, putting it back where I'd found it. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was just some weird coincidence, or maybe some previous tenant had written it, but it didn't sit right with me. I tried to forget about it for a while. I went on with my days, but that journal kept bugging me. I found myself glancing at the vent every so often, wondering if there was something else behind it, something I didn't know about. But I didn't want to think too much about it. Then, a few days later, I decided to go back to the journal. I figured if it had been there that long, I might as well take a look at the rest of it. When I opened it up again, I noticed the handwriting had become even more erratic. The entries got weirder, too. One entry was about how I'd been getting home late one night, around 10 p.m. It described exactly what I'd been wearing, how I'd gotten out of my car, and how I had walked up the stairs to my apartment, holding my keys tightly in my hand. There was no way this person could have seen me that clearly from the street, unless they were right there, watching me. That's when I started to feel sick. Whoever had written this journal had been watching me for months. They had been keeping track of my every move. I tried to ignore it, but it wasn't easy. The more I read, the more I realized just how much this person knew about me. They'd written about my friends, the way I interacted with them. How I always seemed to stand a little too close to the door when we hung out, like I was ready to leave. There was even an entry that mentioned how I'd been crying in the bathroom a few days ago. I hadn't even told anyone about that. How did they know? The journal was starting to feel like a personal invasion. It was like this person had been living in my life, seeing things I hadn't even noticed, making me feel like I was never alone. Then one entry stopped me dead in my tracks. It was about my cat, Olive. The writer described how Olive would always wait by the window when I left for work, looking out for me. She watches from the window like a guard dog, but she never barks, the journal said. I'd never told anyone about that. It was true, though. Olive had this weird habit of sitting by the window every morning when I left, just staring out at the street. But how could this person know that? How could they know the little details of my life that I hadn't even shared with anyone? That's when I realized that this wasn't just some weird coincidence. Whoever wrote this journal wasn't just watching me. They were stalking me. I spent the next few days obsessively checking my apartment. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checked everything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I left my apartment, I felt like someone was just behind me, following my every move. It came to a head one night when I came home late after work. It was around midnight, and I was exhausted. I didn't turn on the lights right away, just dropped my bag by the door and went straight to the kitchen to get a glass of water. But as I walked past the living room, I stopped. The journal was on the coffee table. It wasn't where I had left it. I had tucked it back behind the vent. But now it was out in the open, like someone had been reading it. My heart started pounding as I walked closer, my mind racing. I picked it up, my hand shaking. Flipping through the pages, I realized something was different. The handwriting wasn't the same. The entries had stopped being about me. They started describing my apartment. The floors. The furniture. The way the light hit the walls in the morning. And then, in the last entry, it simply said, "She's finally asleep." That was when I knew. Whoever had been writing this had been in my apartment. They had been here. They were watching me, right now. I grabbed the journal, ran out the door, and didn't stop until I was at a friend's place. I didn't go back to the apartment for weeks. I didn't care about the lease, the rent, or any of that. I just couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't be in a place where someone had been hiding, watching, and writing about my life. I still don't know who did it. I never really thought about automatic car washes until it happened to me. I had just finished a long shift at work and figured I'd get my car washed before heading home. It wasn't the first time I'd been to this place, so I figured it would be a quick and easy stop. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary, especially not what happened that day. The place was one of those drive-through automatic car washes, the kind where you just pull in, put the car in neutral, and let the machines do their thing. There were a few cars ahead of me in line, so I had to wait for my turn. Nothing unusual so far, just sitting there with the engine off, trying to kill time on my phone. Eventually, it was my turn, and I slowly pulled forward into the wash bay. I rolled my windows up, locked the doors, and set my phone down. I'd done this dozens of times before. The car wash started with the usual sounds, the rumbling of the machines, the whoosh of the water spraying down. I wasn't thinking about anything specific, I just sat there, watching the brushes move around my car. Then, just as the machines were about to start scrubbing the sides of the car, I felt a weird sensation. It was like I wasn't alone in the car. At first, I thought it was just the water hitting the windows and the noise of the machines, but something felt off. It was almost like someone was standing right outside my window. I turned my head quickly to the side, trying to shake the feeling. That's when I saw him. A man. He was standing at the driver's side of my car, looking directly at me. I couldn't make out much of his features, just a vague outline of his face and body. His face was pressed up against the window, and he was staring straight at me. It wasn't the kind of look you get from someone casually passing by, it was different. It was intense, almost predatory. I froze. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. It didn't make any sense. The car wash was fully automated. No one was supposed to be outside the car, let alone that close to it. He didn't seem like an employee, and there was no reason for him to be standing there. I tried to ignore him, hoping he would just go away. I focused on the lights from the machines, the noise, anything to distract me. But then I saw it, his hand. He was trying to open the door. Slowly, carefully, as if he knew I was watching. His fingers wrapped around the door handle, and he pulled. I immediately locked the door again, but it was too late. My heart started pounding. I knew something was wrong. Who the hell was this guy? Why was he trying to get into my car? I looked around, but the other cars in the wash bay were too far away for anyone to notice what was going on. I was completely alone, stuck in the narrow passage with this man. I couldn't move. The car wash had already begun, and there was nowhere to go. I was trapped. I looked at the rearview mirror, hoping to see anyone working the machines, but the wash was automated, and I didn't see anybody. The man's hand was still on the door handle. He was pulling again, this time more forcefully. I wasn't sure if he was trying to break in or just see if he could get it open. Either way, I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was in danger. Panic started to set in. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe properly. I started looking for my phone, but I couldn't find it right away. The machines were making so much noise, and I was so focused on what the man was doing that I couldn't think clearly. I finally grabbed my phone, but it took me a few seconds to unlock it. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. I dialed 911 as quickly as I could, but the call didn't go through right away. I could feel my heart pounding harder, louder in my chest. The man was still there, still tugging on the door, trying to get in. I could see his face now, his expression getting angrier, like he was frustrated that I wouldn't let him in. Finally, the call connected. The dispatcher asked what the emergency was, and I could barely get the words out. "Someone's trying to break into my car," I said, my voice trembling. I told them where I was, the address of the car wash. I could barely keep my thoughts straight. I didn't even know what to do anymore. The dispatcher told me to stay calm and keep the doors locked. She said someone would be there soon, but I didn't know if I could wait. The man hadn't stopped trying to get in. Every time I looked over, he was still there, trying the door handle, his eyes locked on mine. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the car wash machine started to wind down. The brushes stopped spinning, the water stopped spraying. I was almost done, and the car wash was over. The last thing I needed was for the door to open and the man to get inside. I wasn't sure if he would leave, or if he was planning to do something worse. But as soon as the wash was over and the machine stopped, I saw the man step back, just a few feet from my car. He didn't move toward the door again. He just stood there, staring at me. For a moment, we locked eyes, and I could see the anger in his expression. It wasn't just about getting into the car anymore. It was like he was angry that I hadn't let him in. Without thinking, I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the wash bay as quickly as I could. I looked behind me and saw the man standing there, still watching, but I didn't look back again after that. I drove straight to the nearest police station, my hands still shaking. The cops couldn't find the man when they checked the car wash, but I wasn't about to take any chances. I gave them a full description, but I didn't feel safe until I was home and locked inside my apartment. I haven't been to that car wash since. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. But I learned a valuable lesson: never be too complacent. Even in the most routine, ordinary situations, you never know who might be watching. It was one of those rare afternoons where I had no plans. I just finished a couple of tests at school, and my parents were busy with work, so I decided to head to the mall to pick up a few things. Nothing big, just some new clothes and maybe some books. I'm not really a big shopper, but I figured I'd treat myself a little. The mall was relatively empty for a Friday, which made it feel a bit quieter than usual. I was wandering around the main floor, trying to find a pair of jeans that weren't too expensive but still looked good. It was a typical day. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as I passed by the shoe store, I noticed a group of 3 adults. A man and 2 women, maybe in their 30s or early 40s. They were standing just outside the entrance, looking around. It wasn't the way they were standing that caught my attention, but the way they looked at me. It wasn't like a glance, like you'd expect from a stranger in a public place. No, they were staring at me. It felt wrong, but I tried not to think too much of it. I kept walking, glancing at the shoes in the window. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw them move, and before I knew it, they were standing right in front of me. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice a little too frantic for my taste. "Have you seen a little girl around here?" "About this tall," he motioned with his hand, "dark hair, pink jacket." "She's about 6 or 7. We've been looking everywhere." I don't know why, but something about the way he spoke made me feel uneasy. Maybe it was the fact that they looked calm enough, but there was this strange tension in the air. The man seemed rushed, but not in a way that made me feel like he was genuinely panicking. He was almost too calm. I mean, what kind of parent just walks up to a random teenager in a mall and starts asking about their missing child? No, sorry," I said, shaking my head. "I haven't seen anyone like that." The woman standing beside him nodded, and I thought she looked a little too relieved at my answer. She had this smile that felt forced, like she was trying to be polite but something wasn't quite right. "Thank you. We can't find her anywhere." "She wandered off and we're getting worried," she added, sounding almost rehearsed. The way she said it made me question if they were really parents at all. The other woman, who hadn't spoken yet, stepped forward, looking even more anxious. "We've been searching for a while, and we don't know where else to look. It's just," she broke off mid-sentence and looked at the man, like they had some silent agreement. Then the man spoke again, his tone suddenly shifting, softer, but still just as urgent. "Hey, would you mind helping us out? We think she might have gone towards the exit, and if you could just check, maybe help us find her. We're not sure where else to go." I'm not sure what made me hesitate, but something did. I stood there, unsure. At that moment, a cold feeling ran through my chest. I glanced around, but the mall was still quiet. No one seemed to be paying attention. Maybe they were just desperate parents, I thought, trying to find their child. But why had they picked me? I should have just walked away. I should have just told them I didn't have time to help. But instead, I nodded. Okay, I'll look around by the exit. The man smiled, a little too wide, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Thanks. We really appreciate it. They all turned and started walking toward the far end of the mall, not saying anything else. I fell in line behind them. Something in the back of my mind told me that I should be cautious, but my curiosity and guilt took over. I kept thinking that maybe they really were just worried parents. It wasn't until we reached the escalators that I realized how far I'd followed them. The mall exit was on the ground floor, but we were heading toward the back entrance, where the service areas were. The further we walked, the more my unease grew. There were fewer people around, and the lights seemed dimmer in that part of the mall. It felt isolated. The noise of the crowd faded, and suddenly, it was just the four of us. The woman in front of me kept looking back, like she was checking to see if I was still there, but she never said anything. I tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right, but as we turned another corner, I realized I didn't even recognize where we were anymore. I stopped in my tracks. "This isn't the exit," I said, my voice a little shakier than I wanted it to be. "I thought we were going to the exit." The man turned, his face unreadable. "Oh, it's just a shortcut. We're close." I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The whole situation was starting to feel wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Why hadn't they just gone to the front exit like any normal person? Why had they led me here? Before I could backtrack, the woman ahead of me stopped and looked over her shoulder at me, her smile vanishing. She took a step closer. "It's just a bit further, don't worry. We'll find her. Just keep going." I started to feel trapped. They were walking so slowly now, and the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. No one was around. The silence was deafening. Something clicked in my mind, and the realization hit me all at once. These weren't parents looking for a lost child. They were luring me somewhere. I didn't know why it took me so long to realize it, but I had to get out of there. I turned quickly and started walking back toward the escalators, but before I could get very far, I heard the man's voice, low and urgent behind me. "Hey, what's the rush?" he asked, his voice changing. "We're just trying to help you help us." I didn't look back. I just kept walking faster, breaking into a jog as I passed the service doors, heading back toward the main part of the mall. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from them. Suddenly, I felt a hand grab my shoulder, pulling me back. My heart raced in my chest, but before I could react, a voice yelled from down the hall. "Security." I turned and saw a mall security guard running toward us. The man immediately let go of my shoulder and stepped back, his expression cold, almost angry. The woman and the other man just stood there, their faces suddenly blank. The security guard was fast, and within moments, they had them surrounded. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran the rest of the way out into the main area of the mall where people were talking and shopping. I could hear the guard calling out, telling me to stay put, but I just needed to get away from them. I never saw those people again, but I was shaken. It took me weeks to feel normal again, to trust that when I saw someone in public asking for help, I wouldn't instantly be reminded of that moment. It wasn't until later, when I was talking to one of my friends, that I realized just how lucky I was. Apparently, there had been a series of similar incidents at local malls over the past few months, people getting lured into quiet, isolated areas and disappearing. No one knew exactly what happened, but I guess I just got out in time. I don't go to that part of the mall anymore. I still think about it sometimes, and I've learned to trust that gut feeling that something's wrong, even if it's just a small voice in the back of my head. It was the one thing that saved me. The ATM was bathed in pale blue light, a lonely beacon on an otherwise quiet street. I had parked my car just a few feet away, keeping the engine running for warmth. It was late, close to midnight, and the crisp night air felt sharper than usual. The kind of cold that cuts through your jacket and settles in your bones. I wasn't planning to stay long. Just a quick withdrawal, enough cash to cover a few things I needed the next day. I glanced over my shoulder as I stepped up to the machine. The street was empty, except for a few parked cars scattered down the block. Nothing moved. No pedestrians, no traffic. A faint hum from the streetlights was the only sound. It was quiet, too quiet, but that's what I liked about this time of night. Fewer people, less hassle. The ATM whirred as I punched in my pen and selected the withdrawal amount. I reached into my pocket, half distracted, fiddling with my phone to check my messages. The machine spat out the cash, and I grabbed the bills, stuffing them into my wallet. That's when I heard it. A faint rustle, like shoes scraping against pavement. At first, I thought it was just the wind kicking up some debris, but then it came again, closer this time. A deliberate step. I froze, my hand still on my wallet, and turned slowly. A man emerged from the shadows near the corner of the building. He wasn't tall, but he was solidly built, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head. His face was partially obscured, but the glint of his eyes caught the light from the ATM. He wasn't running, wasn't rushing toward me, he was walking, slow and deliberate, like he already knew I wasn't going anywhere. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't make this hard." I felt my stomach drop. My grip on my wallet tightened instinctively, even as my brain screamed at me to stay calm. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. He stepped closer, and I could see the outline of something in his hand, a knife. Not huge, but sharp enough to get his point across. "The money," he said, nodding toward my wallet. "All of it. Now." My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I raised my hand slightly, trying to show I wasn't going to fight him. "All right, man, just take it easy," I said, fumbling with my wallet. I pulled out the cash I had just withdrawn and held it out to him. He snatched it quickly, but instead of walking away, he stayed put, his eyes narrowing. "That's it? That's all you got?" I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, that's all I took out." He didn't look convinced. His grip on the knife shifted slightly, and he took another step forward. "Nah, I think you've got more. And you're gonna get it for me." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "What?" "The ATM," he said, nodding toward it. "You're gonna take out more. And if this one doesn't let you, we'll go to another." I felt my knees go weak. This wasn't just a quick robbery anymore. He wanted to prolong this, to make me go along with whatever twisted plan he had in mind. "Look, I don't have a lot in my account," I said, trying to reason with him. "I can't." He cut me off with a sharp gesture, the blade catching the light. "Stop talking and do what I say. You don't want this to get worse." I hesitated, my mind racing through my options. The ATM was right there, but my gut told me this wouldn't end with just another withdrawal. He was too calm, too methodical, and that terrified me more than anything. This wasn't his first time. "Fine," I said finally, stepping back toward the machine. My hands were shaking as I inserted my card and punched in my pen again. The screen asked how much I wanted to withdraw, and I selected the maximum. It wasn't much, just a couple hundred, but it was all I could take out. The cash came out in a neat stack, and I handed it to him, hoping it would be enough to make him leave. But he just took it, stuffing it into his pocket without a word. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Let's go," he said. My heart skipped a beat. "Go where?" He motioned toward my car with the knife. "To another ATM. I know there's more around here. We're gonna hit a few, see how much you can pull out." I felt trapped, cornered. If I got into that car with him, I had no idea what would happen next, but none of the possibilities were good. My thoughts were racing, trying to come up with a way out. "Look, man, you've got the cash," I said, trying to sound calm. "Just take it and go." "I won't say anything, I swear." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Get in the car." I didn't move. My body felt like it was frozen, caught between the urge to run and the fear of what would happen if I did. He took another step closer, and I could feel the sharp edge of the blade in his voice as he spoke again. "Don't make me repeat myself." My mind was screaming at me to think, to act, to do something before it was too late. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights approaching from down the street. A car, moving slowly, its engine humming softly in the distance. It was like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the car coming closer, and then I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. "Help! Call the police!" My voice echoed off the empty buildings, loud and desperate. The man's expression twisted into anger, and he lunged toward me, but the sudden commotion must have startled him. The approaching car slowed down, its headlights washing over us, and I saw the man hesitate. For a split second, he seemed unsure of what to do. That was all I needed. I turned and ran, sprinting toward the car with everything I had. The driver, a middle-aged woman, looked shocked as I waved my arms frantically, shouting for help. She rolled down her window just as I reached her, and I blurted out, "He's got a knife. Call the police." Behind me, I heard the man curse loudly, but when I turned to look, he was already running the other way, disappearing into the shadows. The woman grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her hand shaking as she tried to explain what had happened. I stayed by her car, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It felt like hours before the police arrived, though it was probably only a few minutes. I told them everything about the ATM, the knife, the cash, and the man's demand to take me to another machine. They took my statement, searched the area, but he was gone. I still think about that night. About how close I came to getting into that car, and what might have happened if I had. The police never found him, and I doubt they ever will. But every time I pass an ATM now, I feel that same knot in my stomach, the memory of those eyes watching me from the shadows. It was late, later than I meant for it to be. I had been driving for hours, trying to get home from visiting my sister. The highway felt endless, and I was running on fumes literally and figuratively. When I saw the gas station sign, I almost felt relieved. It was one of those small, out-of-the-way places, just a few pumps and a little building with flickering lights, but it was the only thing around for miles. I pulled in, parked next to one of the pumps, and went inside to pay. The place was empty except for the guy behind the counter, a younger guy who barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. I told him I needed to fill up and asked if they had a restroom. He nodded toward the back and muttered something about a key. There wasn't anyone else in the store, so I grabbed the key hanging on the hook by the counter and headed to the restroom. The door was one of those heavy, industrial ones, with peeling paint and a rusty lock. Inside, the place was as bad as you'd expect: dirty tiles, a flickering light, and a smell that made me want to hold my breath. But I didn't have a choice. I had to go. I was quick, trying to touch as little as possible. When I finished, I washed my hands and dried them on my jeans because the paper towel dispenser was empty. Then I went to leave. The door wouldn't open. At first, I thought maybe the lock was jammed. I tried turning the handle again, harder this time, but it didn't budge. I checked the lock itself, twisting it back and forth, but it was already unlocked. That's when I realized the problem wasn't the lock. The door was being held shut from the outside. I knocked, then banged on the door. Hello? Hey. The door stuck. My voice echoed in the tiny space, but there was no answer. I waited, listening. I thought maybe the guy at the counter would come check, but it was dead silent. I banged again, harder this time, and yelled, "Can someone open the door?" Nothing. My heart started to race. I tried to think logically. Maybe the door was heavy, and it got stuck somehow. Maybe the guy at the counter didn't hear me. But then I remembered how quiet it was in the store when I walked in. He had to have heard me. I pulled out my phone to call the gas station, but there was no signal. Just a spinning wheel where the bars should have been. I tried moving around the tiny room, holding the phone up, but it didn't make a difference. I was completely cut off. Panic started creeping in, but I told myself to stay calm. I knocked again, softer this time, hoping someone passing by might hear me. Hello? Can someone let me out? The door stuck. My voice sounded shaky now, and hearing it like that made the panic worse. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear anything on the other side. At first, there was nothing but the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Then I heard something, a shuffling sound, like footsteps. Relief flooded me. Hey! I'm stuck in here. Can you open the door? The footsteps stopped. I waited, expecting to hear the scrape of the lock or the door handle turning, but nothing happened. Hello? I called again. The silence felt heavier now, pressing against me. Then the footsteps started again, slower this time, moving away from the door. Wait. Don't leave. I yelled, banging on the door again. But whoever it was, they were gone. I felt trapped in every sense of the word. The tiny bathroom felt smaller with each passing second, and the silence outside made it worse. I tried to think of a way out. The window was too high and too small to climb through, and the walls were solid concrete. There was no way out except the door. I don't know how long I waited, but eventually, I heard something again. A faint creak, like the sound of a door opening. My heart leapt. Maybe the guy from the counter had finally realized what happened. I pressed my ear to the door again, straining to hear. Hello? I called, but my voice sounded weak now. The footsteps were back, heavier this time, and getting closer. They stopped just outside the door. My breath caught in my throat. Is someone there? For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, so quiet I almost didn't hear it, there was a soft tap on the other side of the door. Just one deliberate knock. I stumbled back, my chest tight and my pulse racing. Who's there? I tried to sound firm, but my voice cracked. Let me out. No response. The knock didn't come again. I stared at the door, my mind racing. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to help me. They were toying with me. I fumbled with my phone again, praying for a signal, but it was useless. The spinning wheel taunted me, and I felt the weight of the situation pressing down. I was trapped, completely at the mercy of whoever was on the other side. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the door. It felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then, just when I thought they might have left, the doorknob turned. It moved slowly, the sound of metal against metal sending a chill through me. I held my breath, frozen in place. The door opened just a crack, enough for me to see a sliver of the dimly lit hallway beyond. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The door didn't open any further, but it didn't close either. I couldn't see anyone on the other side, just the empty space beyond the crack. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Then, suddenly, the door slammed shut. The sound was deafening in the small space, and I stumbled back, hitting the sink. My hands were shaking, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay in there. I don't know where I found the strength, but I ran to the door and pounded on it with everything I had. "Let me out!" I screamed over and over again. "Let me out!" And then, as suddenly as it started, the door opened. It didn't creak this time. It just swung open, revealing the empty hallway beyond. There was no one there. I didn't think. I just ran. I didn't even stop to look at the counter as I bolted out of the gas station and into my car. The pump was still in my tank, the meter frozen mid-fill, but I didn't care. I yanked it out, threw it onto the ground, and sped away. I didn't stop until I was miles down the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I still don't know who was out there or what they wanted, but I know one thing: I'll never stop at a gas station that isolated again. It started on a Friday night. I just finished dinner at a small cafe downtown and was walking back to my car when someone brushed past me hard enough to knock my purse from my shoulder. I didn't think much of it at first, just someone in a hurry. But when I bent down to grab it, it wasn't there. The person who'd bumped me was already disappearing around the corner, and I realized they had it. My heart sank. My whole life was in that bag: wallet, keys, phone. I ran after them, but by the time I turned the corner, they were gone. I flagged down a nearby police officer and explained what had happened. He said they'd file a report but didn't sound optimistic about getting it back. I drove home feeling shaken. I canceled my credit cards, locked my phone remotely, and changed some passwords from my laptop. I thought that was the end of it. Annoying, yes, but manageable. I didn't even bother to tell my family. It wasn't worth the stress. The next morning, my mom called. Her voice was tight, like she'd been crying. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, and she sounded surprised. She said she'd gotten a text from me the night before saying I was in trouble and needed money. My stomach turned over. I hadn't sent anything like that. I checked my accounts immediately. Someone had managed to get into my email. There were drafts of messages I hadn't written and emails forwarded to addresses I didn't recognize. They'd sent messages to my friends and family asking for help, claiming I'd been in an accident and needed cash urgently. Some of them had even responded. I called the bank and froze everything, but it wasn't fast enough. A few transactions had already gone through online shopping, money transfers. I spent hours on the phone trying to clean up the mess. By the time I finished, it was late afternoon, and I was exhausted. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I got a text from my sister. It was strange because she rarely messaged me so late. She asked if I was okay and said she was outside. Confused, I went to the window and looked out. Her car wasn't there. I texted her back, saying I was fine and asked what she meant. She replied, You just told me to come over. Said you needed me. I hadn't sent that. I checked my messages and found one I didn't remember typing, sent from my number to hers. My heart pounded as I stared at it. The wording didn't even sound like me. I stayed up the rest of the night, checking my locks over and over, convinced someone was watching me. I thought about calling the police, but what could they do? No one had broken in, and the texts didn't prove anything. The next morning, I went to the phone store to get my number changed. They told me my account had been accessed from another device, likely by someone who'd gotten into my carrier account using personal information from my wallet. They secured it, and I left with a new number. I hoped that would solve the problem. It didn't. By Monday, emails were coming in from places I hadn't been, confirmation of hotel reservations, online purchases, even a gym membership. Someone was pretending to be me. Worse, they were good at it. They'd use my social media to post updates, things like feeling sick, taking a break from the world, so anyone who noticed the weird messages wouldn't question them. I went to the police again, and this time, they took it more seriously. They opened an investigation and advised me to monitor my accounts closely. They said it could be a case of identity theft, but something about it felt too personal for that. Whoever was doing this didn't just want my money, they wanted to take over my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. It said, "You can't stop me." I froze. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to block the number, but I didn't. Instead, I replied, "Who is this?" The response came instantly, "You." I didn't sleep at all after that. I called the police in the morning and showed them the texts. They said they'd trace the number and see what they could find. They told me to keep my doors locked and not to go anywhere alone. That evening, I noticed my front door lock looked different. Scratched, like someone had tried to force it. I checked all the windows, and one of them was slightly open. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I stayed at a friend's house that night. The next day, I got another text. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my house. My hands were in the sink, washing dishes. I hadn't even known anyone was there. The message said, "I'm always watching." That was the last straw. I went back to the police, and this time, they sent someone to my house. They found a camera hidden in my living room, a small, black device tucked between books on a shelf. I felt sick. I hadn't noticed it, hadn't even thought to look. The officers told me to pack a bag and stay somewhere else while they investigated. I left that afternoon and went to my parents' house. For the first time, I told them everything. The police eventually traced the text to a prepaid phone purchased at a gas station across town. The camera had no fingerprints, and the email trail led nowhere. Whoever it was, they'd been careful. Too careful. I haven't been back to my house since. I'm staying with my parents for now, trying to put my life back together. The texts have stopped, but I still feel like someone's watching me. I don't know if they'll ever find the person who did this, and I'm not sure I want to know who it was. This happened last year, and it's still hard to shake off. I've never really told anyone about it, but now, I feel like it's finally time to share. It all started one afternoon when I came home from work. I had a long day, nothing unusual, just the usual rush hour traffic and the stress of dealing with clients. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a package sitting by my front door. It was just a regular brown box, nothing special. I figured it was something I had ordered online. I couldn't remember what it was, but I was always getting small deliveries for different things, so it wasn't that odd. I didn't think twice about it. I grabbed the box and brought it inside. It was heavier than I expected, but I thought it might just be a few books or something. I set it down on the kitchen counter and looked at the label. It was addressed to someone I didn't know. The name was completely unfamiliar, and the return address didn't ring any bells either. I was confused, but I figured it was just a mistake from a delivery service. I figured I'd call them, explain the mix-up, and get it sorted. But something made me hesitate. I don't know why. Maybe it was because it was already in my house, or maybe I was just curious about what was inside. I tore off the tape, opened the box, and stared at what was inside. It wasn't what I expected at all. There was a large plastic bag filled with something wrapped in cloth. At first, I thought it was just a bunch of clothes, maybe some sort of donation item. But then I saw what was underneath the fabric. There were photographs. Old, faded ones, stacked on top of each other. Some of them were of people I didn't recognize, but others were of me. They were pictures taken from the street outside my house, from angles I knew were impossible unless someone had been watching me for a while. I could feel my heart start to race as I flipped through more of the pictures. There were shots of me walking my dog, getting into my car, even standing at my kitchen window. It was like someone had been following me for months. But that wasn't the worst part. Beneath the photos, there was something wrapped in more cloth. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me, and I carefully unwrapped it. It was a lock of hair. Long, dark hair. The kind that matched mine. My stomach twisted as I stared at it. It felt like the air had gotten heavy, suffocating. It didn't make sense. Why would someone send this to me? I set the box down, shaking, trying to figure out what to do. I was about to call the police when I heard a knock at the door. I froze. I didn't know what to think. Who would knock at this time of day, especially after I'd just opened that box? I stood still for a second, wondering if maybe I was just being paranoid, but then I heard the knock again. More urgent this time. It wasn't a gentle knock, it was forceful, almost angry. I walked cautiously to the door, trying to calm my breathing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Through the peephole, I saw a man standing there. He looked normal enough, mid-40s, average build, dressed in a worn-out jacket and jeans. But his expression, his eyes were wide, frantic, like he was on the edge of something. He knocked again, louder this time. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Something about this didn't sit right. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I stepped back, trying to stay calm. I was about to call the police when I heard the man speak through the door. "I know you have it," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need it back." I didn't respond. My mind was racing. What the hell was he talking about? What did he want from me? "I saw you open it," he said, his voice trembling with panic now. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." I couldn't breathe. I knew it wasn't a coincidence that the package had come to my door. This man had sent it, and whatever was inside, whatever was happening, it was more than just a strange mistake. "I'm not going to ask again," he said. "Give it back. Now." I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed with fear. My hands were shaking, and my mind was trying to think, to make sense of the situation. But there was no way I was going to let this man in, not after what I'd just seen. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I knew I needed to call the police, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the door. The man was still standing there, his silhouette barely visible through the glass. I couldn't hear him anymore, but I knew he was still there. I called 911. My voice was shaky, and I couldn't get the words out fast enough. I told the dispatcher everything: the package, the photos, the hair, and the man at the door. They assured me help was on the way, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes before I heard the sirens. The man was still there when the police arrived, standing just outside my door, pacing. The officers asked me to stay back, and they quickly got the situation under control. The man didn't try to run. He just stood there, almost like he was waiting to be arrested. They took him into custody, but I didn't hear much about what happened after that. The police didn't give me many details. They took the box, the photos, and everything else, and said they would handle it. They assured me I was safe, but I didn't feel safe. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me for so long, and the idea that he knew so much about me was horrifying. I never found out who the man was or why he'd sent the package. The police said it was part of an ongoing investigation, but I don't think I'll ever know the full truth. I've never had a delivery mistake like that again, but I'm always looking over my shoulder now. I never open a package without checking who it's for. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear a noise outside my window. I always wonder if it's him. I've been camping a lot, and I've always loved the solitude that comes with being in the wilderness. I'm not the kind of person who gets scared easily, especially when I'm out in nature. I usually find peace there. But what happened to me last year, in a remote spot I'd never been to before, has completely changed the way I think about being alone in the woods. It started out like any other solo trip. I found a spot off the beaten path, no one around for miles, just me and the trees. I set up my tent as usual, made a small fire, and started cooking dinner. The air was crisp, and it was quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves. Nothing unusual. Just the kind of peaceful, serene setting I had been craving. That night, after I had eaten and the fire had died down, I crawled into my sleeping bag, tired but content. The night was cold, the kind of cold that makes you appreciate being tucked inside a warm sleeping bag. The wind picked up a little, making the trees sway. Everything was calm until I heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound, a soft crunch of dirt or leaves. I figured it was probably an animal, a deer maybe, moving through the forest. But then it stopped. Just like that. I froze, listening. Everything went quiet. A few minutes passed, and I tried to settle back down, thinking it was nothing. But then I heard it again. The crunching sound, this time louder. Closer. My heart started to beat faster. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was the wind. I pulled the covers tighter and listened again. There it was. Footsteps. No animal would make that kind of sound. These were heavy, deliberate steps. Whoever or whatever was out there was moving slowly, carefully, as if they were trying not to make noise, but failing. I couldn't help it. I grabbed the flashlight I always keep by my side and unzipped the tent a little, just enough to peek outside. The night was pitch black, except for the glow of my campfire, which had nearly burned out. The light barely reached beyond the small circle around the fire. But in that small light, I didn't see anything. No movement. No figure. Just shadows. I waited a few more minutes, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Probably just a raccoon or some other animal. But the footsteps started again. Only this time, they were closer. A lot closer. I could hear them clearly, and they weren't moving like an animal. It was human, or at least, something walking like a human. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my knife for protection and unzipped the tent fully, stepping outside, shining my flashlight in every direction. The air was still and cold. The footsteps stopped as soon as I was outside, but I couldn't see anyone. No movement. I checked the surrounding trees, the shadows, but everything was still. My heart was pounding in my chest. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The only sounds I could hear were the wind and the occasional crackling from my campfire. There was no one. I started to think I was just imagining things. I was alone. I knew I was alone. But then, just as I was about to go back into the tent, I heard it again. This time, it was behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The footsteps stopped again, and I felt that strange, uneasy silence surrounding me. My instincts were telling me to stay calm, but I was scared. I don't scare easily, but that night, alone in the dark, I felt like something wasn't right. I spent the rest of the night awake, lying there with the knife in my hand, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Every time I almost drifted off, I'd hear the footsteps again. They seemed to be circling me, like whoever it was knew I was listening and was waiting for me to let my guard down. It felt like they were taunting me, getting closer every time, but when I tried to confront them, they would stop, leaving me in a tense, silent waiting game. Hours passed like this. Finally, when the first light of morning broke through the trees, I heard nothing anymore. The footsteps stopped for good. I didn't sleep at all that night, just kept my eyes open, waiting, hoping the morning would bring some relief. And when I finally saw the sun starting to rise, I packed up my things quickly. I wasn't staying another minute. When I got out of the tent to stretch my legs and gather my stuff, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Around my campsite, all the way around the fire pit and my tent, were muddy footprints. They weren't animal tracks. These were human tracks, big ones, like a man's boots. And they were all over the place, going in circles around my camp, getting close to my tent, and then veering off. There was no mistaking it. Someone had been there. Someone had been walking around my tent all night, and I didn't hear them leave. I couldn't make sense of it. The tracks were fresh, but there was no sign of anyone nearby now. No sign of them leaving or anything else out of the ordinary. But the realization hit me like a punch in the gut. Whoever it was had been watching me, and they had been there the entire night, just out of my sight, circling my camp. I don't know why they hadn't done anything else, but the thought of it sent me into a panic. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, not even bothering to make sure everything was perfectly packed. I just wanted to get out of there. The whole way back to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the trees made my heart race. But there was nothing. Nothing but the silence of the woods. I haven't gone camping alone since that trip, and I don't think I ever will again. Even now, just thinking about it, I feel that same chill down my spine. Whoever it was, whether they were just some kind of sick person playing games or someone with worse intentions, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to move silently, how to make sure I never saw them. And I'll never forget those muddy footprints circling my camp, the footsteps I heard all night, always stopping just when I tried to confront them. Something about that situation felt so wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I was never meant to leave. If there's one thing I've learned from that night, it's that the woods aren't always as peaceful as they seem. And when you're alone out there, anything can happen. Anything at all. We thought it was going to be a good trip. The four of us, me, my girlfriend Kayla, and our friends Steve and Rachel, had planned it for weeks. We wanted to get away, somewhere quiet. No cell service, no work, no distractions. Just us in the woods. We picked a remote spot in a national forest, about a 2-hour hike from the parking area. We packed everything carefully: tents, sleeping bags, food, water, and a first aid kit. We even brought a satellite phone for emergencies, though we all agreed we wouldn't use it unless we had to. It wasn't about staying connected. It was about disconnecting. The first day was perfect. We reached the campsite in the afternoon, set up our tents, and had a fire going before sunset. The air smelled like pine, and the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle in the trees. We joked, we ate, and we stayed up late talking. It felt like we were the only people in the world. The trouble started the next morning. I was the first to wake up. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cold air, planning to start the fire again. But something felt off immediately. The campsite was too empty. The cooler, which we'd left near the fire pit, was gone. So was the bag with our snacks and cooking gear. At first, I thought maybe an animal had dragged it off. But when I looked closer, I didn't see any signs of that. No torn wrappers, no scattered cans. It was just gone, like someone had picked it up and walked away with it. I woke the others. They didn't believe me at first, but when we checked around the campsite, we realized it wasn't just the food that was missing. Kayla's small backpack, which had our first aid kit and some personal items, was gone too. And so was the satellite phone. We all stood there, staring at each other. It didn't make sense. None of us had heard anything during the night, and there were no obvious signs that anyone else had been around. But the fact was, someone had taken our stuff. We decided to split up and look around. Steve and I went one way, and Kayla and Rachel went another, agreeing to meet back in an hour. Steve and I followed a narrow path leading away from the campsite. It was overgrown and hard to navigate, but we figured it was as good a place as any to start. About 20 minutes in, we found something strange. A single can of soup, sitting upright in the middle of the trail. It was one of ours. I recognized the brand. But why would someone leave it there? It felt like a breadcrumb, but we didn't know if we should follow it. We turned back, uneasy. When we got back to the campsite, Kayla and Rachel were already there. They hadn't found anything except for some flattened grass near the edge of the site, like someone had been standing there, watching. We tried to stay calm. We still had some supplies: water bottles, a couple of energy bars we kept in our tents, and our sleeping gear. But the realization that someone had taken our food and the satellite phone made everything feel different. We weren't alone out here, and whoever was out there didn't want us to leave easily. The rest of the day was tense. We stayed close together, taking turns keeping watch while the others rested. As the sun went down, the forest seemed to close in around us. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, made my skin crawl. That night, none of us slept much. Around midnight, we heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, circling the campsite. We didn't have a flashlight, one of the things that had been taken, so we sat in the dark, gripping the camping knives we had brought for food prep. The footsteps stopped after a while, but the damage was done. We were too scared to stay in the tents, so we sat around the cold fire pit, whispering about what to do. By morning, we decided to leave. We still had water and enough energy to make it back to the parking area. We packed up what little we had left and started walking. About an hour into the hike, we found something that made my stomach turn. Another one of our food items, a granola bar, this time sitting in the middle of the trail. Like the can of soup, it was perfectly placed, almost inviting us to take it. We didn't touch it. We didn't even stop. We just kept walking, faster now, our eyes darting to the trees on either side of the trail. I kept feeling like someone was watching us, but every time I turned around, the path was empty. Then we heard it. A snapping branch, close by. Too close. We froze, listening. The sound came again, from the right side of the trail. Kayla grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. Steve and Rachel were ahead of us, and Steve motioned for us to keep moving. But before we could, a man stepped out from behind a tree. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His face was pale, and he didn't say anything. He just stood there, blocking the trail. In his hand, he held a long hunting knife. None of us moved. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. "Turn around," the man said, his voice low and flat. "Go back to your camp." Steve stepped forward, holding his own knife, though it looked laughably small compared to the man's. "We're leaving," Steve said. "We're going to the parking lot." The man tilted his head, like he was considering this. Then he smiled. "No, you're not." That's when Rachel screamed. Another man had appeared behind us, cutting off our escape. He was holding a machete, and his face was just as pale and expressionless as the first man's. I don't know how long we stood there, frozen, but it felt like forever. Then Kayla whispered, "Run." We bolted off the trail, into the trees. Branches whipped at my face and arms, but I didn't care. I could hear the men shouting behind us, their footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. I didn't dare look back. Eventually, we stumbled into a dry creek bed and followed it, hoping it would lead us somewhere safe. The shouting faded, but we didn't stop. We just kept going, even when my legs felt like they were going to give out. By some miracle, we found the parking area. Our car was still there, and we piled in, locking the doors and peeling out onto the road. None of us spoke until we were miles away. We reported it to the park authorities, but they didn't seem surprised. Apparently, there had been other incidents in the area, campers reporting stolen supplies or strange encounters, but nothing had ever come of it. We were lucky to get out. I don't know what those men wanted, and I don't want to think about what would have happened if we hadn't run. All I know is that I'll never go camping again. I don't know what made me go out there that night. I wish I hadn't, but I did. I can still feel the weight of it when I think back. The rain was coming down hard, pounding against the windows like it had something to prove. The wind howled, and I could hear the trees outside creaking and bending with the storm. I was alone at the time, just trying to relax after a long day, curled up on the couch with a book. The only light came from the dim glow of the lamp beside me, and it was quiet, save for the sound of the rain. Then, I heard it. A noise. At first, I thought it was just a storm, maybe the wind making something rattle, but then I heard it again. It was faint, almost muffled, but there was no mistaking it. The sound of something scraping against the shed in my backyard. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I wondered if I was imagining things. It was late, and I hadn't heard anything earlier. The shed had always been just a place to store old garden tools and things I never used, but in that moment, it seemed so much more ominous. I tried to tell myself it was just a storm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The noise came again, a scraping sound, followed by something heavier, like a footstep. It was clear now, someone or something was out there. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the police, but I didn't. I don't know why, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the thought that if I made that call, I'd seem foolish. Who would be outside in this weather? Who would be in my shed? But then the idea settled in my mind. What if someone was breaking in? What if they needed help? The thought of someone being hurt, someone in distress, kept me from just running back into the house. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, wrapped myself in my raincoat, and headed outside. I stepped out into the yard, my boots sinking into the soggy ground. The rain felt cold against my skin, but it didn't matter. My heart was racing in my chest. I turned on the flashlight and shined it toward the shed, my hands shaking. The beam flickered at first, but then it steadied, cutting through the darkness. The shed stood at the far end of the yard, shrouded in shadow. I couldn't see anything unusual, but I knew someone or something was out there. I took a few steps forward, the wet grass slick underfoot. I was just about to reach the door of the shed when I heard the noise again. This time, it was a thud. It made me jump, and my grip on the flashlight tightened. The door to the shed was slightly ajar, not enough for someone to get out, but enough for me to see a sliver of movement inside. I hesitated. I almost turned back, but I couldn't. I had to know what was happening. I pulled the door open, and the hinges squeaked loudly in the still night air. The shed smelled of old wood, damp and musty, and I had to squint in the dim light of my flashlight to make out anything. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Is someone in here?" There was a moment of silence. The only sound was the rain tapping against the roof, but then, just as I thought maybe I was imagining things, I heard it. A soft, strained voice. It came from the far corner of the shed, barely above a whisper. "Help me." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The voice was weak, but it was real. I took a cautious step forward, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. There, in the corner, I saw movement. A figure hunched down, its head bent, shoulders shuddering. I couldn't see their face, but I could tell they were sitting on the floor, almost curled up in a ball. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" There was a long pause before the figure responded, but when they did, it was in a low, raspy voice that sent a shiver down my spine. "I need to stay here. Please, don't make me leave." I stood there, staring at the shape in the corner, trying to make sense of what was going on. I had so many questions, but I didn't know how to ask them. Who was this person? How had they gotten in? Why were they hiding in my shed in the middle of a storm? "What do you mean? What are you doing here?" I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and confusion. They didn't answer right away. Instead, they shifted in place, and I heard the scrape of metal on the floor. My flashlight flickered again, and I realized they were holding something in their hand, something long and metallic. A knife, maybe? The fear that had been building inside me turned to panic. I should have run, I should have turned and left the shed, but for some reason, I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching as the figure straightened up. "You have to help me," they said, their voice now louder, more urgent. "I can't go back. Please. I can't go back." I had no idea who they were or what they were talking about, but I knew I couldn't stay. Something was wrong. It felt wrong. This was no stranger asking for help. This was something else, something darker. I turned to leave, my heart racing in my chest, when the figure suddenly moved toward me. They stumbled, dragging themselves across the floor. I was too slow to react, and before I knew it, they were standing in front of me, blocking the door. "You can't leave." "I need you to stay," they said, their voice now frantic, desperate. I didn't have a choice. I was trapped in the small shed, the door behind me blocked. My only option was to get past them. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing my phone, but before I could pull it out, the figure lunged. I don't know how I did it, but I pushed them back with all my strength. They stumbled, and for a split second, I thought I might have a chance. Without thinking, I bolted out the door and into the rain. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't stop running until I was inside the house, locking the door behind me. I called the police right away. When they arrived, they found nothing in the shed. No person, no evidence of anyone being there. But they did take a report. They checked the area, but they didn't find anything suspicious. They said I must have imagined it, that the storm was playing tricks on my mind. I haven't been able to shake the feeling, though. Every time it storms, I hear that voice in my head. Please, don't make me leave. It doesn't go away. Whoever that person was, and whatever they wanted, I don't think they were really asking for help. And that thought still haunts me every time the rain starts to fall. I'll start by saying I'm not the type to get spooked easily. I've always thought of myself as someone who keeps their head on straight, especially in uncomfortable situations. But that night in the parking garage, it still messes with me. It was a Friday, around 9:30 p.m. I'd been at the office late finishing up some last-minute work and figured I'd grab a bite to eat before heading home. I parked my car in the usual spot at the underground garage. It's not the most convenient place in the world, but it's cheap and always pretty empty at night. I didn't think much of it when I parked and walked to the elevator to head out for dinner. When I got back about an hour later, the garage was pretty quiet, just like it usually is. The lights flickered a little, but nothing too unusual. I walked down the row of cars, heading toward my space when I saw it. A dark sedan parked directly in front of my car, blocking me in. It was the only car around, and I could tell right away that something felt off. I figured it was just someone who didn't know how to park properly, or maybe they just left it there temporarily. But as I got closer, I noticed the person in the driver's seat. The lights from the overhead lamps caught the outline of the person, and it was clear they weren't just sitting in their car, waiting for someone. They were staring straight ahead, completely still. I thought maybe they were just on their phone or something, but there was something unsettling about it. They hadn't moved an inch since I'd parked. At first, I didn't think much of it. I stood there for a moment, looking at the car, wondering if I should say something. But I decided to just wait it out. Maybe they'd move or leave soon. But as I stood there, I realized the person didn't even seem to notice me. There was no shift, no glance in my direction, nothing. I cleared my throat and took a few steps closer, hoping they'd react. But they didn't. The car's windows were tinted dark enough that I couldn't make out any details about the person. I felt a little stupid, standing there, staring at a car. But I couldn't help it. The whole thing just didn't sit right. After a minute or so, I finally knocked on the window. I figured they'd open the door and apologize or explain themselves. But instead, the person just shifted slightly in their seat. Not enough to look at me, but I saw their head move, just a bit. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. This wasn't right. I stood there for a second, unsure what to do. I knocked again, a little louder. Still no response. Something in me snapped, and I decided to walk around the car. As I moved past the front of the sedan, I saw the rearview mirror adjust, and I froze. The person was now looking directly at me through the rearview mirror. But they didn't move. Their eyes stayed locked with mine, unblinking, like they were waiting for me to make a move. I took a step back, my stomach dropping. Something about the way they looked at me, it was off. Like they didn't even recognize me as a person. More like I was a threat. I turned around and walked briskly back toward my car. I wasn't about to stick around and see what this person was up to. I had enough of a gut feeling to know that something wasn't right. As I walked back to the front of my car, I glanced back, just to check. The sedan was still there, the person still watching me through the mirror. When I got to my car, I pulled my keys out of my pocket and tried to unlock it, but the lock wouldn't disengage. I pressed the button again and again, but nothing happened. The damn thing wouldn't open. That's when I realized my heart was pounding. I was sweating now, feeling a panic building in my chest. I reached for the handle, yanked it, and still nothing. It wouldn't budge. I spun around and looked back at the sedan. The person in the car hadn't moved, but now their head was tilted slightly to the side, like they were studying me. I swear I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The more I stood there, the more I felt like I was caught in some kind of trap, with no way out. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Should I confront them? My phone was still in my pocket, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the car. If I made a move, who knew what could happen? Finally, I decided to try the old-school approach. I walked around the back of my car, eyes locked on the sedan, and went to the rear door. I yanked it open, jumped inside, and locked the door behind me. I threw my keys in the ignition and tried to start the engine. Nothing. I turned it again, this time harder. And then, thank God, it roared to life. I didn't even think. I slammed the car in reverse and floored the gas. As I did, I caught one last look at the sedan through the rearview mirror. The person was still sitting there, perfectly still, staring after me. I couldn't get out of that garage fast enough. I'm not sure what they wanted or what was going on, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. When I finally pulled out onto the street and got back to the main road, I felt like I could breathe again, but the whole thing stuck with me. I don't know who that person was or what their intentions were, but the way they acted, the way they didn't move, didn't react. I've never felt so trapped in my life. It wasn't until I got home and sat down that I realized just how close I'd come to being caught in something much worse. I haven't gone back to that parking garage since. Every time I pass by, I feel a knot in my stomach. I can't shake the feeling that I was a target, and that person was waiting for the right moment. I don't know if they followed me out or if they're still down there, but I don't think I'll ever be able to forget those eyes in the rearview mirror. I had been job hunting for months when I got an email about an interview. It was for a position I'd applied to a few weeks earlier, some kind of administrative role. The email came from someone named Daniel Rowe, the hiring manager. The company, Bridgepoint Solutions, seemed legit. They had a basic website, nothing fancy, just enough to show they existed. The interview was set for 5 p.m. on a Friday. I remember thinking it was a weird time, but I didn't question it. The address was in the industrial area on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't far, maybe a 20-minute drive from my apartment. When I got there, it was already getting dark. The building was a large, gray structure, the kind of place you'd expect to see offices for logistics or manufacturing companies. The parking lot was almost empty except for a few cars scattered around. That felt strange, but I told myself it was because it was late on a Friday. I parked and walked to the front door. It looked clean and well kept, with a small plaque that read Bridgepoint Solutions. I pressed the buzzer, and a voice came through the speaker. "Come in." "Second floor," the man said. The door clicked, unlocking, and I stepped inside. The lobby was quiet. Too quiet. There was no receptionist, just an empty desk with a stack of outdated magazines. The air felt still, like no one had been there in a while. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe they were cutting costs or working remotely. I took the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was dimly lit, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. There were several doors, all closed. At the end of the hall was one door slightly ajar with a light on inside. A small sign next to it read Conference Room B. I knocked. "Come in," the same voice said. I stepped inside, and a man stood up from the table. He looked ordinary, dark hair, a button-up shirt, probably mid-40s. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Emily," he said, holding out his hand. "Yes," I said, shaking it. His grip was firm, too firm, and his hand was cold. Something about him put me on edge, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he was studying me. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to a chair across the table. The room was sparse. Just a table, a few chairs, and a whiteboard with nothing written on it. No laptops, no paperwork, no sign of any actual business. I sat down, my stomach twisting. "So, tell me about yourself," he said, leaning forward. I started talking about my work experience, but he barely listened. His eyes were locked on mine the entire time, unblinking. He didn't take notes, didn't ask follow-up questions. When I paused, he just smiled again, that same empty smile. "Interesting," he said after a moment. "You seem very qualified." "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was sizing me up. The silence stretched on too long. "Do you live nearby?" he asked suddenly. That question threw me. It had nothing to do with the job. About 20 minutes away," I said cautiously. He nodded, as if that was important information. "Do you live alone?" Now I was alarmed. That had nothing to do with the interview. I laughed nervously. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," he said, sitting back in his chair. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, watching my every move. I decided I'd had enough. "I don't think this is relevant to the position," I said, standing up. "Thank you for your time." "Sit down," he said, his voice low and firm. I froze. There was no friendliness in his tone anymore. He stood up, blocking the door. My heart started pounding. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I think we're done here," I said, stepping toward the door. "You're not going anywhere," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a knife, the blade catching the light. My blood ran cold. "Don't scream," he said. "If you do, I'll make this worse for you." I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The room was small, and he was between me and the door. "Please," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, the knife glinting in his hand. I backed up until I hit the wall, my breathing quick and shallow. Then I remembered my phone. It was in my bag, slung over the back of the chair. He hadn't taken it. If I could just distract him for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep him talking. He smiled again, that same empty smile. "Because I can," he said simply. While he spoke, I inched toward the chair, my fingers brushing the strap of my bag. I grabbed it and yanked it toward me, pretending to stumble. The movement startled him, and he lunged at me. I screamed and swung the bag at him with all my strength. It hit his arm, knocking the knife to the floor. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the chair and slammed it into his chest, sending him stumbling back. I ran for the door, yanking it open and bolting down the hallway. He was right behind me, his footsteps pounding against the floor. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst. I reached the stairs and practically threw myself down them, skipping steps, nearly falling. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. When I reached the lobby, I ran straight for the door, fumbling with the lock. He was halfway down the stairs when I finally got it open. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors just as he burst out of the building. He pounded on the driver's side window, yelling something I couldn't hear over my own panic breathing. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, not stopping until I was miles away. When I finally pulled over, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The police didn't find him. When they searched the building, it was empty, and the knife was gone. The company? It didn't exist. The website was a fake, probably set up just to lure people like me. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out of there, but I don't want to think about it. It happened on a Friday evening. I had just put my son to bed, and I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I had ordered some things online earlier that week. Maybe it was a late delivery. I got up and looked through the peephole. A man stood there in a brown jacket holding a small box. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his face, but he smiled when I opened the door, keeping the chain latched. Delivery 4. He glanced at a piece of paper in his hand. Mrs. Taylor? The name was wrong, but I figured maybe it was a mix-up with the delivery company. I think you've got the wrong house, I said. He chuckled nervously. Sorry about that. Could you just confirm the address? That's when I started to feel uneasy. The box didn't have a label on it, and he wasn't wearing any kind of uniform. I asked him which delivery service he was with, but he avoided the question, mumbling something about working with a third-party company. I don't think that's for me, I said, starting to close the door. His hand shot out and grabbed the edge of the door before I could shut it. Wait, he said, his tone changing. I think this might actually be for you. I froze. His smile was gone, and his grip on the door was firm. My heart started pounding, but I tried to stay calm. Let go of the door, I said, trying to sound confident. Instead of listening, he pushed against the door, hard enough to rattle the chain. I leaned my weight against it, but I could feel him testing it, trying to force it open. I just need to come in for a second, he said. His voice was steady, almost too calm, and it scared me more than if he'd been yelling. I'm calling the police, I said, backing away from the door and grabbing my phone off the table. He stopped pushing and looked straight through the gap. You won't, he said, his voice low and even. Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. I dialed 911 anyway, but before I could hit call, he slammed his shoulder into the door. The chain held, but it groaned under the pressure. I screamed, dropping my phone, and ran to grab the baseball bat I kept in the corner of the living room. Stop it, I yelled, holding the bat in front of me like a shield. He didn't respond. The chain snapped with a loud crack, and the door flew open. He stepped inside, shutting it behind him, and for a second, we just stared at each other. He wasn't tall or particularly muscular, but there was something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. He looked determined. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, raising his hands like he was trying to calm me down. "Just stay quiet, and this will be over soon. Get out of my house." I screamed, raising the bat. He lunged at me before I could swing it, grabbing my wrists and forcing the bat out of my hands. I struggled against him, kicking and clawing, but he was stronger than he looked. He shoved me against the wall, pinning me there. "Where's the kid?" he asked, his breath hot against my face. I froze. "Leave him alone," I said, my voice shaking. His grip tightened, and he smiled this slow, deliberate grin that made my skin crawl. "That's up to you." I knew I couldn't let him near my son. I'd die before I let that happen. Gathering every ounce of strength I had, I kneed him in the groin as hard as I could. He let out a grunt and stumbled back, giving me just enough time to grab the bat from the floor. This time, I didn't hesitate. I swung it with everything I had, hitting him square in the side. He yelped and fell to his knees, clutching his ribs. I didn't stop. I swung again, this time catching him on the shoulder. He cursed and tried to grab the bat, but I pulled it back and hit him once more, this time in the head. He collapsed onto the floor, groaning, but I didn't wait to see if he was down for good. I ran to the door, unlocked it, and bolted outside, screaming for help. A neighbor heard me and came running. I told him what happened, and he called the police while I stayed on the porch, shaking and trying not to cry. The man didn't come out of the house. By the time the cops arrived, he was unconscious on the floor, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. They took him away in handcuffs, and I later found out he wasn't a delivery driver at all. He'd been scoping out houses in the neighborhood for weeks, pretending to deliver packages as a cover. He had a record breaking and entering assault. That night, I slept in my son's room with the door locked and the bat by my side. I don't think I've ever felt so scared in my life, but I'm just grateful we made it out okay. We'd all gone out camping to this spot one of us had found online, tucked way back in the woods off some dirt road. It wasn't anything fancy, just a clearing near a stream with enough space for our tents and a small fire pit. There were 5 of us, me, Mark, Julia, Chris, and Mia. We'd set up camp in the late afternoon, cooked dinner over the fire, and stayed up for a while talking and laughing. The woods were quiet that night, just the sound of the stream and the occasional rustle of leaves when the wind picked up. It was peaceful. We all went to bed around midnight. We were packed into 2 tents, me, Mark, and Chris in one, and Julia and Mia in the other. Everything felt normal. I don't know what woke me up, but when I opened my eyes, it was still dark. It had to have been early morning. The air felt colder, and the fire outside had burned down to just embers. Mark was snoring quietly next to me, and Chris was still, too. I lay there for a moment, listening, trying to figure out why I was awake. Then I noticed it, a faint sound, like something moving outside the tent. It wasn't loud, just the crunch of leaves, soft but close. I held my breath and strained to listen, but it stopped as quickly as it started. I told myself it was probably an animal. This was the woods, after all. I rolled over and eventually fell back asleep. When I woke up again, it was because Mark was shaking my shoulder. The sun was just starting to come up, and the inside of the tent was dim, but I could see the look on his face. He looked uneasy. "Chris isn't here," he whispered. That woke me up completely. I sat up and looked over at where Chris had been sleeping. His sleeping bag was unzipped and empty, his boots gone. I figured maybe he'd just gotten up early and gone to the stream, but Mark's expression made me pause. We got out of the tent and found Julia and Mia already up. They were standing near the fire pit, which Julia had started again. Both of them looked worried. Julia was holding her arms around herself, and Mia was pacing. "Chris isn't here," Julia said, her voice low. "We've been calling for him." The woods felt different in the morning light. The trees that had seemed comforting the night before now felt too close, too thick. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore, it was heavy. We all started calling Chris's name, walking in different directions but staying within earshot of each other. There was no answer. After about 15 minutes of searching, Mia called out for us to come to the edge of the campsite, near the tree line. Her voice had a strange tone to it, and I felt my stomach twist as I jogged over to where she was standing. She pointed at the ground. At first, I didn't see what she was looking at, but then I noticed the disturbed dirt and leaves. There were marks, faint but clear enough to tell something had happened. The dirt was scuffed up like there had been a struggle, and there were deep impressions in the ground where someone had fallen or been dragged. And then there was something else. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch. It was small, just a strip, but it was the same color as the jacket Chris had been wearing. No one said anything for a moment. We just stared at the ground and the torn fabric, the reality of it sinking in. Something had happened to Chris. He hadn't just wandered off. Mark broke the silence first, saying we needed to look farther into the woods. I could tell he was trying to sound confident, but his voice was shaky. We split up into pairs, Mark and me going one way and Julia and Mia going another. We didn't go far, just enough to scan the area around the campsite. None of us wanted to go too deep into the woods. As we searched, I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching us. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig made my heart race. The woods were too quiet. There should have been birds, insects, something, but there was nothing. Just us. After about an hour, we regrouped back at the campsite. No one had found anything. No tracks, no sign of Chris. We were all tense, speaking in short, clipped sentences. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The sense of fun and adventure was gone, replaced by a gnawing fear we didn't want to admit out loud. Mia wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but Mark argued that we couldn't just leave Chris behind. Julia agreed, but her voice wavered when she spoke. None of us knew what to do. We didn't have cell service out here, and the nearest town was miles away. It felt like we were completely cut off. As we debated, a sound broke through the silence, the sharp crack of a branch snapping. It came from somewhere just beyond the tree line. All four of us froze, our eyes darting toward the direction of the sound. "Chris!" Mark called out, his voice loud and shaky. There was no answer. We waited, holding our breath, but the woods stayed silent. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Mia grabbed my arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark looked torn, his gaze shifting between the woods and the rest of us. Finally, he nodded. "Let's pack up." "Now!" We moved quickly, throwing our gear into our backpacks with shaking hands. The whole time, I felt like something was watching us, hidden just out of sight. I kept glancing toward the woods, half expecting to see someone or something step out. But there was nothing. As we hiked back toward the trailhead, none of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, weighed down by the fear we couldn't shake. Every now and then, I thought I heard faint noises behind us, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. Just the trees. When we finally reached the cars, I felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly made me dizzy. We threw our packs into the trunks and got in, locking the doors. As we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the woods, watching us leave. We reported Chris missing as soon as we reached town. Search teams were sent out, but they never found him. The official story was that he must have gotten lost in the woods, but none of us believed that. Not after what we saw at the campsite. Not after hearing that sound. I don't know what happened to Chris that night, but I still think about it. About the torn fabric. About the marks on the ground. About how close we must have been to whatever or whoever took him. I still can't shake the memory of what happened. It's been months now, but every time I close my eyes, I can see it all over again. The pain, the terror, the feeling that someone was out there, watching. I'm not sure I'll ever get over it. It was just supposed to be a quick camping trip, something simple, just to get away from the noise of the city for a weekend. I've always enjoyed the solitude of the woods, so when I found a quiet spot, I knew it'd be perfect. No one else around for miles, just the sounds of nature and the comfort of my tent. I set up my camp near a small stream and spent the day walking around, familiarizing myself with the area. It was about the third day when I decided to go off trail, just to explore a little. The woods were thick with trees, the ground soft underfoot, and it felt like the kind of place you could easily get lost in if you didn't know what you were doing. But I didn't mind. I wasn't going far, and I had a good sense of direction. My plan was simple: walk for a while, maybe find a nice spot for photos, and then head back. I had been walking for about 20 minutes when I noticed something strange. The underbrush started to thin out, and I could see the ground was uneven, almost like something had disturbed it recently. At first, I didn't think much of it. Animals, maybe, or some weather erosion. But then, I stepped on something that didn't feel right underfoot. It was a rope, thin and tight, hidden beneath the leaves. Before I could process what was happening, the rope pulled, and I felt a sharp, brutal pain shoot up my leg. I screamed out and instinctively tried to pull away, but it was too late. The trap had already triggered. I looked down and saw that a thick metal clasp had closed around my ankle, the pressure unbearable, and I could feel something sharp digging into my skin. Blood was starting to drip, and I couldn't move. Panic flooded my chest, and I knew I had to get out of it, but my mind was racing. I looked around, but all I saw were trees, more trees. No one around. I tried to yank my foot free, but it was useless. The pain was almost too much to bear, and I could feel myself starting to lose control. What kind of trap was this? It wasn't a bear trap. The metal was thinner, more like something set for smaller animals, maybe a snare? But it was too heavy for something meant for an animal that small. And the fact that it was hidden so well made me think it wasn't just a hunting trap. I managed to calm myself enough to think, forcing myself to breathe deeply. I wasn't going to die here, not like this. I wasn't going to just give up. I looked around, trying to find anything that could help me. The trap was tight, and there was no way to loosen it. But there had to be a way to get out. I realized that I needed to stay calm. The more I panicked, the more it would hurt. But the longer I stayed in that spot, the more dangerous it became. I knew I was alone out here, at least, I thought I was. The woods were vast, and I was a good distance from camp. The trap could have been set by anyone. But then it hit me. I wasn't just injured. I was alone. I had no way to get help. And there was no telling who had set the trap or if they were still nearby. I tested the trap again, trying to move my leg, but it was useless. The more I moved, the worse the pain became, and I could feel the blood pooling around my ankle. I was losing time. Whoever set this trap, they could be watching me right now. Or worse, they could be coming to finish what they started. I thought about the knife I had in my pack, just a few feet away. It wasn't the best tool for the job, but it was something. It was the only thing I had. I tried to reach for it, but every movement caused the trap to tighten even more. I gritted my teeth, determined not to give in to the pain. I couldn't afford to panic. I had to get the knife. It took what felt like hours, but finally, I managed to grab the knife from my bag. I knew it wouldn't cut the metal, but maybe I could use it to loosen the mechanism somehow. It was a long shot, but it was the only thing I could think of. I struggled with it for what felt like forever, sweat pouring down my face, my breath shallow and erratic. Every second I wasted was another second closer to being completely helpless. Just as I thought I might pass out from the pain, I heard it. A snap of a twig behind me. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to listen, but the forest was too quiet. I turned my head as much as I could, but I couldn't see anything. The sound was distant, but it was unmistakable. Someone was out there. I forced myself to stay still, praying that whoever it was wouldn't find me. I had no way of defending myself, and I knew if they saw me, there would be no way I could run. I had to focus on getting out of this trap, but I couldn't help but feel that someone was watching me. That they were getting closer. The minutes felt like hours. I kept hearing noises, footsteps, twigs breaking, but I couldn't see anyone. I knew whoever it was wasn't too far off. They had to know I was here. The feeling of being hunted, trapped like an animal, was overwhelming. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, each thump a reminder of how vulnerable I was. Finally, with a desperate move, I managed to use the knife to pry the trap open just enough to slide my foot out. The pain was blinding, but I didn't stop. I forced myself to stand, even though I could barely feel my leg. I didn't care. I stumbled forward, dragging myself away from the trap, my vision swimming from the pain. I had to get back to camp. I didn't care how, but I had to make it. I stumbled back to the path, trying to get back to camp. My ankle was bleeding, my whole body aching from the strain, but I couldn't stop. The thought that someone could be following me, watching me, made it impossible to slow down. Every step felt like a lifetime, but I kept going. Eventually, I made it back to camp, but the relief was short-lived. There was still the sick feeling that someone had been watching me, and I wasn't sure I was safe yet. I don't know who set the trap, or if they were still out there, but I didn't stay another night to find out. I packed up as quickly as I could, ignoring the pain in my leg, and drove straight back to the nearest town. It's been weeks, but I still feel like someone's watching me when I'm alone in the woods. I haven't gone back, and I don't think I ever will. I've been running the same route for years. It's early mornings, just after sunrise, when the streets are still empty and the air is cool. I like the peace of it, the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, my breathing in time with the steady beat of my heart. There's something soothing about being alone with my thoughts. But that morning, everything changed. I was on my usual route, heading down a quieter stretch of the park, when I saw him. He was standing by the sidewalk, looking down at something in his hands. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People are always walking or sitting, especially around the park. As I got closer, he lifted his head and looked right at me. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice a little too loud for the stillness of the morning. I slowed my pace just slightly, not wanting to come off rude, but I wasn't in the mood to stop. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my pace up. I wasn't planning on engaging much. Do you know where the nearest gas station is? He asked, still standing in the same spot. His hands were shaking slightly, like maybe he was cold or nervous. His clothes were ragged, nothing that screamed normal. Just a plain hoodie and worn-out jeans, nothing remarkable. Ah, yeah, just keep going down the street and turn left at the next light, I said, not wanting to be bothered. I started to pick up speed again, hoping that would end the conversation. But he didn't move. Actually, he said, his voice quieter now, I'm kind of lost. Do you know if there's a bus stop around here? At this point, I was slowing down, not sure how to handle it. He wasn't exactly threatening, but something about his demeanor felt off. He was too still, too intense. And the fact that he hadn't moved from his spot told me something wasn't right. There's a bus stop about a block away, I said, not breaking stride, trying to give a quick answer and move along. But he wasn't letting up. Can you help me find it? I stopped. Not fully, but enough that I could look at him. There was something in his eyes, something desperate, almost pleading. The sun was starting to rise higher, casting a warm light on everything around, but I felt a chill run through me. He was standing too close, now taking a step toward me. I don't know if I can. I'm just running, I said, my voice tight. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck in a situation where I felt unsafe. He didn't seem to understand. Or maybe he didn't care. I just need help, he said, his voice quieter now, more insistent. I'm really lost. It's really important. There was a pause. He seemed to be waiting for something. I felt my chest tighten. My instincts told me to go, to move, to get away, but I stayed. I wanted to be polite. I wanted to help, but something in me screamed to walk away. Still, I wasn't sure what to do. I stood there for a second, trying to find the right words, but the moment felt strange, heavy. He was looking at me like he was waiting for me to do something. I really need to find it. You're not going anywhere, right? He asked. What? My heart skipped a beat, and I suddenly felt very exposed. He had no business asking me that. No business asking me anything anymore. I took a quick step back. I've got to go, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I turned and began jogging again, but before I could even get a few paces away, I heard his footsteps behind me. Heavy and deliberate. Not the quick, light footfalls of someone who's just out for a morning jog like me. I could feel his presence closing in behind me. I picked up the pace, trying to put distance between us, but he matched it. My heart started pounding in my chest. There was no mistaking it now, he was following me. I looked over my shoulder. He was maybe 10 feet away, and he wasn't slowing down. His pace was steady, determined. And now I was scared. Why are you following me? I asked, my voice coming out shaky even though I didn't want it to. He didn't answer. He just kept following, keeping that distance, like he was toying with me. I rounded a corner, hoping to lose him, but when I glanced back again, he was still there, just behind me. His gaze never left me. A sudden panic flooded me. I knew I couldn't outrun him for long, and I didn't want to go any further into the park. It was too isolated, too empty. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't even have my phone with me. There was a bridge ahead, a small overpass that led to a busier street. I made up my mind and began running hard, faster than I'd ever run before, trying to reach that bridge. The sound of his footsteps grew louder behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I made it to the bridge, and for the first time, I risked a glance behind me. He was still there, maybe 20 feet back. But something had changed. The look in his eyes was more urgent now, like he realized he'd almost lost me. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I ran as fast as I could toward the main road where there were cars, people, life. I couldn't risk staying in that park, not with him so close. I made it to the main street and kept going until I reached a convenience store. The door was unlocked, and I rushed inside, breathless, shaking. I looked out the window, but he didn't follow me any further. He had stopped just at the entrance to the park, watching me. And then he turned and disappeared back into the trees. I stayed inside for a while, unsure of what to do. I didn't call the police because I couldn't explain it. Nothing had really happened, right? He hadn't hurt me. He just followed me, made me feel like prey. But it was enough to make my heart race even now, days later. I don't know what his intentions were, but I know one thing: I've never run that route again. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was watching TV when the buzzer rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I let it go. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. I picked up the intercom. "Delivery for you," a man's voice said. "I didn't order anything," I replied. "Maybe someone sent you something," he said, then silence. I didn't buzz him in. After a while, I looked out the window but saw no one. The next evening, same thing. Buzzer rang. "Delivery," the same voice said. "I didn't order anything," I repeated. "Are you sure?" "Maybe check with your roommates." "I live alone." Silence again. I didn't buzz him in. This continued for several days. Always the same voice, always claiming to have a delivery, always at odd hours, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning. I started to feel uneasy. I called the building manager, but he said there was no way to trace who was buzzing me. I asked if there were any cameras. He said they were only in the lobby, not outside. One night, I stayed up late, waiting. Around midnight, the buzzer rang. "Delivery," the voice said. I didn't respond. "Come on, just let me in," he said. I hung up. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. "Why won't you let me in?" I reported it to the police. They took a statement but said there wasn't much they could do without more information. I started staying with a friend. When I returned a week later, there were no more buzzes, no more notes. I moved out shortly after.